For 3 years, I believed my wife was slowly dying inside her own memories. The doctor said she no longer recognized me. My daughter whispered, "Dad, stop torturing yourself. Mom isn't the woman she used to be." Then, one morning at the Apple Fair, a stranger placed an old wooden crate in my arms. She leaned close, her voice shaking. "Go home, lock the door, and don't let your daughter know." That night inside the crate, I heard my wife's voice, and every word she spoke made me realize I had spent 3 years grieving the wrong truth. This is a story that starts with trust and ends somewhere you won't expect. Before we begin, leave a comment. Have you ever questioned whether someone close to you is telling the whole truth? Your instincts matter more than you think. A quick note. Some details are fictionalized to strengthen the lesson, but the message at its core is very real. The stranger's hand pressed a wooden apple crate into my arms at 7 in the morning, and the whispered warning that came with it would shatter 3 years of comfortable lies. I'd been arranging Macintosh apples at my Harvest Fair stall, the way I had for 35 consecutive Octobers, the Vermont air crisp enough to see my breath, when a woman in a faded brown jacket pushed through the early crowd with the kind of urgency that made me straighten. She was maybe 40 lean, with the nervous energy of someone who'd been carrying a secret too long. "Are you Vernon Harlan?" she asked, voice low. "Blanche's husband." The sound of my wife's name in a stranger's mouth stopped my hands mid-reach. I'm 72 years old. I've owned a 50-acre apple orchard in Addison County since 1980, and I'd learned over the past 3 years to find comfort in familiar routines after Blanche disappeared into the fog of Alzheimer's. Hearing her name spoken like she was still real, still present, felt like touching a live wire. "I'm Vernon," I said carefully. He shoved the crate into my chest. Inside, wrapped in bubble wrap, something rectangular shifted with weight. "I've held this for 7 months. She said, glancing over her shoulder. "I can't keep it any longer. Go home alone. Don't open it here." "What is this? Who are you?" "Finn Sawyer," she said, already backing away. "That's all you need to know. Go home, Mr. Harlan." She vanished into the gathering crowd before I could ask another question. I stood there holding the crate, the smooth wood warm from his hands, while the world continued around me, vendors calling prices, the smell of cider, donuts, frying, children laughing. None of it felt real. I left the apples unsold, drove the 15 minutes home with the crate on the passenger seat where Blanche used to ride my hands, shaking enough that I had to pull over twice. The farmhouse looked the same as it had when I'd left that morning, white clapboard green, shutters the oak tree Blanche planted in 1987, starting to turn gold. Everything normal, everything wrong. Inside, I set the crate on the kitchen table, the same oak surface where Blanche and I had shared breakfast for 40 years. The bubble wrap crackled as I unwrapped it. A Sony TCM 200 DV cassette recorder, the kind they stopped making 20 years ago, with a tape already loaded. On the tape's label, in Blanche's distinctive cursive, "For Vernon, October 2022. My wife's handwriting, sharp, precise, the same hand that had graded law school papers for 25 years at the University of Vermont. The same hand I'd been told could no longer hold a pen. I pressed play, static first. Then her voice filled the kitchen and I stopped breathing. "Vernon, if you're hearing this, I found a way to send it out. I haven't lost my mind." It was Blanche, 71 years old, the legal mind that could dissect a contract in minutes, the woman who'd taught property law and laughed at faculty meetings and planted that oak tree with me 35 years ago. Her voice was calm, methodical, the same tone she used when explaining complex precedents to first-year students. "I am trapped here. Celeste and Boyd lied to you about everything. The warehouse fire wasn't an accident. They staged it. I've been held at a facility in Burlington for 3 years, declared incompetent based on a diagnosis that was bought." I sat down hard. Celeste, our daughter, 51 years old, the child we'd raised in this house, who visited every Monday with updates about her mother's care, who hugged me and said the hardest thing was watching someone you love disappear. "There's evidence," Blanche continued, and I could hear the professor in her voice now, laying out facts like she was building a case. "Find Jerome Dalton. He installed security cameras I asked for in August 2020. The footage is stored remotely. The irrigation system at Zone 7, dig it up. There's a lockbox buried 18 inches down. Don't let Celeste know. Not yet." The tape clicked. Static. Then her voice again, softer this time. "I know this sounds impossible. I know you've signed papers. I know they showed you medical reports. Vernon, I need you to trust what you're hearing right now, not what you've been told. I'm still here. I've been waiting for you to find me." The recording ended. I sat there in the kitchen as October sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that drifted like they had every morning for 40 years. The cassette recorder sat on the oak table, silent now, but the words kept echoing. 3 years. 3 years I'd believed the lie because believing was easier than doubting my own daughter. I played it again, listened to every word, every pause, every inflection. That was Blanche's voice, not confused, not lost, but sharp and clear and furious. The third time through, I stopped crying. I'd spent 3 years grieving a woman who was still alive, who'd been imprisoned while I watered her oak tree and sold apples at harvest fairs and signed whatever papers Celeste brought me because I trusted her. If you've ever heard someone you love speak after believing they were lost to you, you know the sound splits you open. But Blanche hadn't called me to grieve. She'd called me to act. I looked at the cassette recorder at my wife's handwriting on the label at the kitchen where we'd planned our life together. Then I began to think like an engineer. Not a grieving husband, not a trusting father. An engineer. From where? In what order? Where do I begin? Irrigation Zone 7 was on the northeast quarter near the property line. Jerome Dalton, I knew that name. He'd done electrical work for us years ago. And the papers Celeste had brought me the ones I'd signed without reading carefully because I was drowning, and she was the one throwing me a rope. Those were upstairs in the filing cabinet. 48 hours until Celeste's next weekly visit. 48 hours to figure out what I'd signed away, what Blanche had hidden, and how to find my wife without alerting the daughter who'd buried her alive. I stood up, legs steadier than they had been in 3 years, and walked to the filing cabinet. The comfortable routine of Saturday morning was over. What came next was forensic examination of my own trust and the systematic dismantling of everything my daughter had built on lies. Blanche was waiting. I'd kept her oak tree alive for 3 years. Now it was time to keep the promise I'd made 40 years ago, the one that mattered more than any paper I'd signed to find her, no matter where she was hidden. The box sat in the back of the hall closet for 3 years, labeled in Celeste's careful handwriting, Blanche, medical. I'd walked past it hundreds of times, never once opening it to look inside. Now I pulled it down and carried it to the kitchen table, hands steadier than they had been in years. 14 documents inside, organized chronologically in labeled folders, the way my daughter always did things. Celeste Garrett, 51 years old, a polished commercial real estate broker in Burlington, who'd inherited her mother's attention to detail and none of her conscience. Each folder had a date tab. Each document had a sticky note in Celeste's handwriting, Dad, signed September 12th, 2020 Dad, signed October 3rd, 2020 Dad, signed November 8th, 2020. I spread them across the oak table and began reading. The first was dated September 8th, 2020, 5 days before the warehouse fire. A power of attorney for healthcare decisions. My signature at the bottom in the shaky handwriting I developed that awful autumn when I thought my wife was losing her mind. I remembered Celeste bringing this one on a Sunday evening after I had spent 12 hours pruning the north orchard. "Just sign here, Dad," she'd said, pointing to the line. Her voice warm concerned the daughter who'd driven an hour to help her struggling father. "It's Mom's insurance paperwork, in case something happens and you need to make medical decisions." I'd signed without reading past the first paragraph. The second document was dated September 14th, 2021, day after the fire. A financial power of attorney giving Celeste co-signing authority on all my accounts. I remembered this one too. She'd brought it to the hospital while I sat in the waiting room, terrified after they had told me Blanche had been found confused and wandering near the burned warehouse. "I'm handling everything so you don't have to worry," Celeste had said, squeezing my shoulder. "You just focus on Mom." The third document made my hands go cold. A waiver of notice dated September 15th, 2020. Legal language I didn't understand then, but could parse now with Blanche's cassette tape fresh in my mind. I'd waived my right to notification of any guardianship proceedings, which meant when Celeste filed to have her mother declared incompetent, the Vermont probate court had no legal obligation to tell me it was happening. I'd signed away my ability to fight for my wife before I even knew there was a fight. The rest of the documents built the cage systematically. 3 loans co-signed in my name, totaling $340,000, all payable to shell companies I didn't recognize. Consent forms for Blanche's medical treatment at facilities I'd never visited. Transfer paperwork for assets I didn't remember authorizing. Each one came with a memory. Celeste arriving after I'd worked a long day, her designer, cashmere sweaters, and warm smile, her voice saying the same things in different variations. "You look exhausted. Let me take care of the details. Just routine paperwork. You trust me, don't you?" How many times had I signed my name without reading, trusting my own daughter, because doubting her felt like betraying everything I'd raised her to be. I made a list the way I used to make them when designing irrigation systems, itemized, numbered, cross-referenced. 14 documents, $580,000 in various transfers, 1 guardianship, 1 life disappeared. By 3 in the afternoon, my eyes burned from reading, and my engineer's mind had mapped the whole architecture of the trap. Celeste hadn't acted impulsively. She'd built this systematically, each document a brick in a wall that would separate me from Blanche and leave her daughter in control of everything we'd built together. I needed air. The eastern warehouse sat a quarter-mile from the main house rebuilt after the fire, but still showing the black scorch mark on the concrete foundation where the kitchen had been. I walked there as the October sun angled low, my boots crunching through fallen leaves. The fire happened September 13th, 2020, at approximately 9:30 p.m. I'd been in the main house when I saw flames through the window, ran down here to find the warehouse kitchen fully engulfed. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, Blanche was gone, found 2 hours later, confused and wandering, on Route 7, unable to explain where she'd been or why she'd left. That was the story I'd believed for 3 years. But standing here now, I remembered things I'd been too frightened to question then. Blanche never used this warehouse kitchen. We'd installed it in 2015 for the seasonal workers, but she always cooked in the main house. More than that, my wife had checked the stove twice every night for 40 years, a ritual so ingrained I could set my watch by it. The idea that she'd left a burner on was absurd. Numbers don't lie. That's what I'd learned in 40 years of engineering, and these numbers screamed a truth I'd been too blind to see. Celeste and Boyd Garrett, her husband, 47, who owned several real estate shell companies, including the facility where Blanche was secretly held, had arrived at the fire scene 20 minutes after the flames started. I remembered because the fire chief commented on how fast the family had responded. 20 minutes. They lived 45 minutes away in Burlington. I'd been too shocked to do the math that night, but I was doing it now. Even if they'd left the moment the fire started, even if they'd driven 90 miles an hour on dark country roads, they couldn't have arrived in 20 minutes. Unless they were already here. Unless they'd set the fire themselves and waited just long enough to make their arrival seem plausible. I stood at the burn mark as the autumn sunset bled crimson behind the green mountains, painting the orchard in shades of rust and gold. 4 years ago, I'd wept at this exact spot, thinking I'd failed to protect my wife from her own declining mind. Tonight, I understood I'd never had the chance. The trap was laid before I even knew there was a trap. Celeste had staged the fire, used it to justify the guardianship, systematically isolated Blanche, while I signed away my rights to fight for her. And she'd done it all while hugging me and calling me dad and telling me she was taking care of everything. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 15 years. Preston Wolf, the attorney who'd handled our estate planning back when Blanche was still teaching, and our biggest worry was property taxes. Monday morning, I'd make the call that would set everything in motion. But tonight, I stood at the burn mark where my daughter had started destroying my life, and I began to plan how I would take it back. I dialed Preston Wolf's number at 7 Monday morning from the farmhouse office, knowing my old friend would recognize that timing alone meant trouble. The green landline phone sat on the same desk where I'd done orchard accounting for 40 years. I'd unplugged the cordless models last night, working on instinct I couldn't quite name. If Celeste had been systematic enough to stage a fire and forge documents, she was systematic enough to think about surveillance. Vernon. Preston's voice came through rough with sleep. He was 58, had practiced estate law in Vermont for 30 years, and counted me among his oldest friends. We'd met when he handled the property transfer for the orchard expansion in '92, stayed close through the years. "What's wrong?" "I need to see you today," I said, keeping my voice level. "Urgent." A pause. I could hear him processing. Vernon Harlan didn't call. At 7 in the morning, didn't use words like urgent. "What time?" 2 o'clock work for you?" "Vernon, what's—" "At your office." I cut him off gently. "Don't mention this to anyone. I'll explain when I see you." Another pause, longer this time. Preston had been in law long enough to know when a client was being careful about what they said over a phone line. 2 o'clock, he confirmed. I'll clear my afternoon. Good, I'll be there. I hung up before he could ask more questions. The cryptic call would worry him, but worry was better than risk. I didn't know if Celeste had access to phone records. I didn't know what resources she had beyond the shell companies and forged papers. But I knew enough to be cautious. The rest of the morning I spent in the orchard, pruning branches that didn't need pruning, moving through motions that would look normal from a distance. If someone was watching, and I had to assume someone was, they'd see an old man doing what he always did on Monday mornings. They wouldn't see him thinking through every conversation, every document, every moment of the past 3 years, looking for patterns. You learn something working with machines for 40 years. Systems break down in patterns, and the first sign is always small. A sound slightly off, a pressure reading 1 degree wrong. I'd missed the signs with Celeste because I'd been looking at her as my daughter instead of as a system. Now I was analyzing the data. She visited every Monday at 4 o'clock. Always brought something cider from the local orchard, pastries from my favorite bakery in Middlebury. Fresh bread still warm. The gift said, devoted daughter. The timing said, surveillance schedule. At 3:50 I washed my hands and changed into a clean flannel shirt. At 3:58 I heard her BMW crunch up the gravel drive. Celeste came through the door with her usual smile, designer cashmere sweater in deep burgundy leather bag, worth more than most people's monthly salary. She looked like success, like a daughter who'd built her own career and still made time for her aging father. "Hey, Dad," she said, kissing my cheek. Her perfume was expensive floral. "Brought you apple cider from Shelburne Orchards, the spice kind you like." "That's thoughtful, sweetheart." We sat in the living room, like we always did, her in Blanche's old reading chair that she'd claimed after the fire, me on the sofa, where I could watch her face in the afternoon light. "How are you feeling?" she asked, pouring cider into the glasses she had brought from the kitchen. "Fine, same as always." "Eating enough? You look thin." "I eat fine." She nodded, sipped her cider, and then reached into her leather bag with the practiced smoothness of someone who'd done this exact motion dozens of times. "I have some routine insurance updates for Mom. Just need your signature on a couple forms." She laid them on the coffee table, clicking her pen. The forms looked official letterhead legal language signature lines, highlighted in yellow. 3 years ago, I would have signed them without reading past the first paragraph. "Let me read it over carefully first," I said, picking up the papers slowly. My eyes haven't been great lately. Things take me longer to read than they used to. I watched her face in my peripheral vision while pretending to focus on the document. For half a second, maybe less, her eyes hardened. The smile stayed perfectly in place, but something behind it shifted. Then it was gone, the warmth back like it had never left. "Of course, Dad," she said. "Take your time. I know it's hard when your vision starts going." My vision was fine, but she didn't know that, and the comment told me she was already building a narrative about my declining faculties. Planting seeds. I read through the form slowly, genuinely this time. Insurance policy updates for Blanche's care facility, or so the headers claimed. But buried in the third paragraph was language about asset transfers and beneficiary changes. Nothing I was signing. "This is a lot of legal language," I said finally. "Can I hold on to these and review them when my head's clearer? Maybe talk to someone who can explain the terms. Another micro-expression frustration maybe, or calculation." "Sure," she said. "Though they're really just standard updates. I can walk you through anything confusing." "I'm sure you can, but I'd feel better taking my time." She stayed another 20 minutes talking about her real estate deals, about Boyd's latest investment property, about the weather turning cold early this year. Surface conversation that felt like a test, like she was checking if I seemed different, if I knew anything I shouldn't. I played the part I'd been playing for 3 years, tired widower, trusting father, man, who'd signed away his rights because his daughter told him it was for the best. She hugged me before leaving, and I patted my daughter's back, wondering where I went wrong and when for her to become this person. "I love you, Dad," she said at the door. "Love you too, sweetheart." I stood at the living room window, watching her BMW taillights disappear down the gravel drive. She'd hugged me, told me she loved me, her expensive perfume still lingering in the room. In 9 hours, I would sit across from Preston and say everything I couldn't say over the phone. Show him the documents, play him the tape, ask him how a daughter could systematically destroy her parents and sleep at night. But first there was somewhere I needed to go alone. Blanche's tape had mentioned irrigation zone 7, said to dig 18 inches down, said there was a lockbox buried there that would prove everything. I had a shovel in the barn, and 6 hours before it got too dark to see. The spare key Dr. Hugo Kemp had given me years ago turned smoothly in the lock of the clinic that had been dark since November. Hugo and I had been friends for 30 years, before we were doctor and patient, the kind of friends who share keys without explanation and ask questions over chess instead of over examination tables. I'd spent Monday evening digging at Irrigation Zone 7, finding exactly what Blanche said would be there, a lockbox with bank statements, photographs, and a handwritten note that ended with 3 words, "Find Dr. Kemp." Now, Tuesday morning, before dawn, I stood in the waiting room of my old family physician's practice smelling dust and disinfectant in equal measure. Dr. Kemp had been my doctor for 25 years. When he died suddenly in November 2021, the obituary said heart attack, and I'd attended his funeral believing it. Now, I wondered what else I'd believed that was a lie. The office looked frozen in Time magazines from last year on the waiting room table appointment book, open to November 12th, 2021, his last day alive. I moved through to his private office, the floorboards creaking under my weight in the pre-dawn quiet. His desk was mahogany, organized the way a doctor's desk should be. I started with the top drawer, patient files, prescription pads, business cards. The second drawer held insurance forms and billing records. The third drawer was locked. I found the key taped under the desk drawer, the kind of hiding place that's obvious if you're looking for it. Inside the locked drawer was a single sealed envelope, my name written across the front, in Dr. Kemp's precise handwriting, Vernon Harlan, private. I opened it, standing at his desk October dawn, starting to gray the windows. The letter was dated November 11th, 2021, one day before he died. "Vernon," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm dead, and I hope you'll forgive me for being a coward." My hands went still. She found my mistake from 2015, a patient named Gerald Morrison who died because I prescribed the wrong dosage of blood thinner. I'd falsified the records to cover it. Your daughter Celeste discovered the truth, I still don't know how, and she gave me a choice sign, the diagnosis she needed for her mother, or face criminal charges, the end of my career, and civil lawsuits that would destroy everything I'd built in 40 years of practice. I sat down in his desk chair, legs suddenly unsteady. I signed the diagnosis she needed. I wrote that Blanche Harlan showed signs of early-stage Alzheimer's disease with cognitive decline, requiring supervised care. It was a lie. Your wife was as sharp as she'd ever been. But I was a coward, Vernon. I chose my reputation over the truth, and I've lived with that guilt every day since. The letter continued in the same careful handwriting, each word landing like a stone. I couldn't live with what I'd done. But before I go, I can at least give you this: Maple Ridge Private Care, 47 Williston Road, Colchester. That's where they took Blanche. GPS coordinates 44.5303 degrees, north 73.1832 degrees west. I signed the transfer papers 3 years ago. I'm sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have left to give you. It was signed Hugo Kemp, MD, and dated the day before his heart attack. Dr. Kemp wasn't a traitor. He was another victim, and guilt had killed him as surely as any disease. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I locked the clinic behind me and drove straight to Jerome Dalton's house. Jerome was 70 years old, retired from a career in forensic accounting that had made him one of the best financial investigators in New England. We'd played chess every Friday evening for 15 years, and he was one of the few people I trusted completely. If Blanche had left instructions to find him, there was a reason. He answered the door in his bathrobe at 7 in the morning, took one look at my face and said, "Come in, I'll make coffee." We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him everything. The cassette tape, the documents, the warehouse fire, Dr. Kemp's confession. Jerome listened without interrupting his accountant's mind processing data, the way it always did, systematic, thorough, looking for patterns. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Blanche called me in August 2020. She said, 'Jerome, I have a bad feeling about Celeste.'" I stared at him. "She asked me to install security cameras, said she didn't want you to know because she might be wrong, and she didn't want to poison your relationship with your daughter if it was just paranoia. But if she was right, she said you'd need evidence." "What kind of cameras?" "4 of them, hidden in the house. Motion-activated cloud storage to an external hard drive I keep here." He stood up, walked to his study, and came back with a laptop. "She knew you'd need evidence if she was right. so I installed them and I kept the archive. He opened the laptop, clicked through folders, and turned the screen toward me. Here's what you need to understand about Blanche. She was always 3 moves ahead, thinking like the law professor she'd been for 25 years. While I was trusting our daughter, my wife was building a case. The screen showed a grid of video files organized by date. Jerome clicked the first one. The footage showed the interior of our house, the study where I kept financial records. Timestamp: April 18th, 2021, 2:17 a.m. Celeste entered the frame, using a key I'd never given her, went straight to the filing cabinet and began photographing bank statements with her phone. 9 times, Jerome said quietly. 9 times your daughter broke into your house over 14 months. He played them chronologically. April, May. July 3 times in August, once in September, twice in October. Every video showed the same thing, Celeste entering the house when I was asleep, or away systematically photographing financial documents, copying real estate deeds, reading through bank statements and investment records. She was building an asset map. Jerome said his forensic accounting brain analyzing what we were seeing, cataloging everything you and Blanche owned so she'd know exactly what to take. The last video was dated October 8th, 25 days before the warehouse fire. Celeste stood in the study for 20 minutes, photographing every document in the filing cabinet, her face illuminated by the phone screen in the dark room. Jerome closed the laptop and looked at me across the chess table, where we'd sat every Friday for 15 years. Blanche left one more thing for you, he said. He pulled an envelope from the bottom drawer. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my wife's distinctive cursive, the same hand that had graded thousands of law school papers, the same hand I'd thought could no longer hold a pen. My hand started shaking for the second time that week. Inside the envelope, Blanche's handwriting covered both sides of a single page, with instructions numbered 1 through 5 in the precise way she'd organized law school syllabi for 25 years. I unfolded the letter at Jerome's kitchen table, afternoon light streaming through the window. The paper was dated August 15th, 2020, 1 month before the warehouse fire. Vernon, it began. If Jerome is showing you this, it means I was right about Celeste, and I'm sorry. Here's what you need to do. Instruction. 1. Apple Zone 7, dig up the irrigation system. This is a decoy to force Celeste to show her hand. There's nothing buried there, but she'll think there is. When she reacts, you'll know for certain. I sat back rereading the sentence. A decoy. The lockbox I'd found Monday evening was planted deliberately baited with just enough real information to seem valuable. Blanche had laid a trap, knowing Celeste would be watching. Instruction and do. The real documents are at the family cemetery under the feng shui stone. I always tended myself. You never liked going there because you said it was morbid. I counted on that. Everything you need is 18 inches down in a waterproof container bank, records, photographs, recordings, property deeds, showing what Celeste has been transferring. The feng shui stone. A smooth granite piece Blanche had placed on her mother's grave 15 years ago. I'd thought it was superstition, had never touched it when I visited. She'd known I wouldn't. Instruction. 3. Find Ivy Lancaster. She's a patient advocate who works with families navigating elder care facilities. Her mother died in one of Boyd's properties 3 years ago, under suspicious circumstances. Ivy understands the system from the inside, and she has personal reasons to help you. Jerome has her contact information. I looked up at Jerome, who'd moved to the kitchen doorway. You have Ivy Lancaster's number. Blanche gave it to me in August 2020, he said quietly. Told me you'd ask for it eventually. Instruction 4. Thank Finn Sawyer for me when you see her. She was the night custodian at the facility where they took me initially. She's the one who smuggled out the cassette tape. I promised her you'd make sure she didn't get in trouble for helping. Finn Sawyer, the nervous delivery driver who'd pressed the apple crate into my arms at the harvest fair. She wasn't just a delivery driver, she was Blanche's lifeline to the outside world. If you've ever loved someone, truly loved them, you know what it means to receive instructions from captivity written in their hand. The paper I held was more than a letter. It was proof she'd been thinking clearly, planning strategically, fighting back while I'd believed she was lost. Instruction 5. Don't confront Celeste until you have overwhelming evidence. She's smart, Vernon. She's been planning this for years, and she has lawyers and resources and people who owe her favors. You'll only get one chance to expose her, so make sure it counts. Build the case first. Trust Preston Wolf, he's ethical, and he'll help you. document everything, record conversations if Vermont law allows it. And most importantly, I love you. I am trying to stay okay. Take care of the plan before you worry about me. The last line was underlined twice. Take care of the plan before you worry about me. I read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word. Then I turned it over. On the back in smaller handwriting was a postscript. By the time you read this, I may not remember writing it. They're starting me on medications I don't need, and I can feel my mind getting cloudier. If I seem like a different person when you find me, know that I fought as long as I could. The woman who wrote this letter is still inside somewhere. Don't give up on her. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by the cold clarity I used to feel when solving engineering problems. Systems thinking. Step by step. Follow the plan. For 3 years, I thought I was protecting Blanche by keeping my distance, believing the experts who said she was gone. I'd had it backwards the entire time. She didn't need me to grieve her. She needed me to fight for her. Jerome returned to the table, setting down fresh coffee. He sat across from me in the same position we'd occupied every Friday evening for 15 years playing chess. She planned all of this, I said finally. The decoy at Zone 7, the real evidence at the cemetery, the camera footage you've been storing. Even Finn Sawyer bringing me the tape she orchestrated the timing. Blanche always thought 5 moves ahead, Jerome said. It's why she was such a good professor. She's been running this operation from inside a locked facility. No, Jerome corrected gently. She set up the operation before they took her. She saw it coming and built the escape route while she still could. What you're doing now is following the map she drew 3 years ago. I folded the letter carefully, hands no longer shaking. The paper felt thin, fragile, but the words on it were strong enough to carry weight. Jerome watched me from across the table. Are you all right? I didn't answer immediately because the truth was still settling into place. Blanche had never needed me to protect her by staying away. She'd needed me to stand up and fight. And she'd left me a roadmap for exactly how to do it. I need Ivy Lancaster's number, I said. Jerome pulled a business card from his wallet, worn at the edges like he'd been carrying it for years. Ivy Lancaster, patient advocate, with a cell phone number and an email address. The first person Blanche told me to find was someone who'd lost her own mother to the same system. Someone who understood what it meant to watch a loved one disappear into the machinery of elder care fraud. Someone who had personal reasons to help me tear that system apart. I put the business card in my pocket next to Dr. Kemp's confession and stood up. Thank you, Jerome. For the cameras, for keeping the letter, for being someone Blanche knew she could trust. She's my friend too, he said simply. Bring her home, Vernon. I left his house with 3 things: a letter written in captivity, a business card for a woman whose mother had died in Boyd's facility, and the absolute certainty that my wife had been orchestrating her own rescue from the beginning. I'd thought she was the victim waiting to be saved. She'd been the architect all along, and I was finally ready to follow her plan. The cafe in Vergennes was 43 miles from Middlebury, chosen specifically because Celeste would never drive this far for coffee. I'd called Ivy Lancaster Tuesday evening from Jerome's house, and she'd agreed to meet Wednesday morning without asking questions. Now I sat at a back table watching the door, nursing black coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner too long. She arrived exactly on time, 34 years old, with the exhausted look of someone who had witnessed too many wrongs without the power to stop them. Dark hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing scrubs like she'd come straight from a shift. Vernon Harlan, she asked, extending her hand. Ivy, thank you for meeting me. She sat across from me, ordered coffee from the waitress, and waited until we were alone again before speaking. Jerome said you found evidence about your wife. Blanche left me instructions, I said. She told me to find you, said your mother died in one of Boyd Garrett's facilities. Something flickered across Ivy's face, old pain carefully controlled. She did, 2 years ago. But let's talk about your wife first. She pulled a folder from her bag, spread papers across the table between our coffee cups. Medical records, billing statements, facility reports, all marked with highlights and handwritten notes and margins. Blanche never showed signs of Alzheimer's. Ivy said her voice clinical, professional. Her cognitive tests were normal always. I accessed the originals before they were altered. The results were changed by the attending physician Boyd appointed, Dr. Simone Blackwell. She's done it for at least 6 other patients I've documented. The pattern is consistent. Normal test results get rewritten to show cognitive decline, justifying continued guardianship. I stared at the papers, Columns of numbers, test scores, dates. Blanche's handwriting on consent forms I'd never seen. How did you get these? I worked at Maple Ridge for 18 months, Ivy said. Patient advocate, it gave me access to records. I've been building a case, but without a lawyer willing to take it on, I couldn't do anything except document. She slid another paper across the table. A billing statement with my name at the top, dated September 2021. You were billed $5,000 a month for Blanche's care, she said. Actual care cost, maybe $3,200. The facility invoiced you for services, never provided private nursing, specialized therapy, medical equipment. Standard markup is about 40%. Boyd was charging you 60% over actual cost. I did the math automatically the way engineers do. $1,800 a month, 36 months since the fire, $64,800. That's just the billing fraud, Ivy continued. It doesn't count the guardianship itself, which gave Boyd access to Blanche's assets, or the property transfers Celeste has been executing, using powers of attorney you signed. Numbers don't lie, that's engineering truth. $64,800 stolen through false billing, alone, not counting the greater theft of Blanche's freedom. Boyd owns Maple Ridge through a shell company called Green Valley Holdings, Ivy said. He's got 3 other facilities in Vermont and New Hampshire running the same scheme. Target elderly people with assets, get guardianship through falsified medical records, bill family members for inflated care costs, while systematically draining the victim's accounts. I looked at her across the table. Why are you helping me? And don't say it's just because you're a patient advocate. Ivy was quiet for a long moment, staring at her coffee. When she spoke, her voice was softer, less clinical. My mother, Ruth Hallett, died in that facility 2 years ago, she said. Boyd used the same tactics on her. She was 71, healthy, managing her own finances fine. Then a real estate broker, someone Boyd had cultivated as a contact, offered to help her manage her assets. My mother signed a power of attorney, thinking she was just getting professional help. 2 months later, Boyd had guardianship. He filed during a brief hospitalization when she had the flu, claimed she was incompetent, and the probate court rubber-stamped it. She looked up at me, and I saw the same grief I'd been carrying for 3 years. He never released the guardianship, Ivy continued. Even after she recovered, even after I hired a lawyer and challenged it. The system moved slowly, and he controlled her medical records, her doctors, her access to everything. She died inside that facility 18 months later. I wasn't there. Boyd had instituted visitation restrictions, said I was upsetting her. I never got to say goodbye. You need to understand, Ivy wasn't just helping me save my wife. She was fighting for her mother's memory, for justice that came too late. I applied to work at Maple Ridge 2 weeks after the funeral, she said. I've been gathering evidence ever since. Medical records, billing fraud, falsified diagnoses. I documented everything, but I was alone. No lawyer would touch it without a living victim willing to press charges, and everyone I tried to help was either too frightened or too convinced by the altered medical records that their loved one really was incompetent. I'm not frightened, I said. And I know Blanche is competent. I have her cassette tape. I have Dr. Kemp's confession. I have Jerome's camera footage. And I have Preston Wolfe. Ivy's eyes brightened slightly. Preston Wolfe is good, ethical. If he takes your case, you have a real chance. You have Jerome, she continued. You have documentation. You have what I didn't have back then. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 people connected by the same crime, committed by the same man, against people we loved. Then Ivy's voice dropped lower, and she leaned across the cafe table. There's one more thing you need to know, she said. Boyd owes money to dangerous people, and he used your name to hide it. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. What do you mean? At loan sharks, gambling debts. He's been forging documents with your signature using your property as collateral for loans he took out to cover his own debts. I found paperwork in the facility's financial records mortgage documents with your signature that you never signed, listed on loans totaling over $300,000. $300,000, my property. My signature forged to cover Boyd's gambling debts to people Ivy called dangerous. How dangerous, I asked. Ivy looked at me with the expression of someone delivering a diagnosis. The kind who don't care about legal processes when they want their money back. I drove straight from Vergani's to Preston's Burlington office, Ivy's warning about dangerous people and forged signatures echoing in my head with every mile. The spreadsheet on Preston's laptop showed 3 years of my life, reduced to columns of numbers, each line documenting how trust became theft. We sat in his corner office overlooking Lake Champlain, afternoon sun slanting through the windows, and waited for Jerome's call. The phone rang at 2 o'clock exactly. Preston put it on speaker. "Vernon, I've been up all night analyzing the records Ivy provided." Jerome said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd stared at numbers until they revealed their secrets. "It's worse than we thought." Preston leaned forward, pen poised over his legal pad. "Walk us through it." 3 shell companies under Boyd Garrett's name, Jerome began. Green Valley Holdings, LLC, Maple Care Partners Inc., and Vermont Senior Services, LLC. All registered in Delaware, all listing Boyd as managing member. Over the past 3 years, $340,000 flowed from Vernon's accounts through these entities. I felt the number land like a physical weight. $340,000. The billing statements Ivy obtained show the money was supposedly for Blanche's care. Jerome continued, "But when I cross-referenced with the facility's actual operating costs, none of it went to patient services. The money moved through the shell companies and disappeared into a separate account, a personal account in Boyd's name at a credit union in South Burlington." Preston was writing rapidly. "Can you trace where it went from there?" "That's where it gets dangerous," Jerome said. "Boyd withdrew the money in cash over the past 3 years. Small amounts, irregular timing. The pattern matches someone making payments on a private debt, the kind you don't put on official books." "Ivy mentioned loan sharks," I said. "Rufus Hampton." Jerome confirmed. "Runs a pawn shop on North Street in Burlington. I did some digging through public records and talked to a contact who knows the local scene. Hampton's pawn shop is a front for a lending operation. High-interest loans to people who can't get legitimate credit. And he doesn't file lawsuits when people don't pay. He uses other methods." Preston set his pen down. "How much does Boyd owe Hampton?" $340,000, Jerome said. The exact amount extracted from Vernon's accounts. The number matched perfectly. 340,000 out 340,000 owed. Boyd hadn't just stolen from me. He'd made me the ghost guarantor of his own gambling debt. How does a man steal $340,000 from his wife's father while claiming to care for that man's imprisoned wife? The question had no answer that didn't end in rage. "There's more," Jerome said quietly. "I found the collateral document Boyd gave Hampton. It's a power of attorney forged with Vernon's signature granting Boyd authority over Vernon's property. Hampton accepted it because the paperwork looked legitimate and Boyd had been making regular interest payments. Until last month." "He stopped paying?" Preston asked. "According to my source, Boyd missed the October 1st payment. That was 4 days ago. Hampton has been asking questions about when he'll see his money." The office was silent, except for the hum of Preston's laptop and the distant sound of traffic on Church Street below. I stared at the spreadsheet on the screen, each line representing a month of theft, 3 years of systematic extraction. "Vernon," Preston said carefully, "do you understand what this means?" "Boyd stole from me to pay his debts," I said. "And when I signed those documents Celeste brought me, I unknowingly gave him access to do it." "Yes, but there's a more immediate problem," Preston said. "Rufus Hampton thinks you're the guarantor. Your signature is on the collateral document. When Boyd doesn't pay Hampton, is going to come looking for the person whose name is on the paper. The weight of it settled over me like cold water. I wasn't just a victim of financial fraud. I was on record as owing $340,000 to a loan shark who operated outside the law. "Can we prove the signature is forged?" I asked. "Eventually, yes," Preston said. "We can get a handwriting expert, compare it to your actual signatures, demonstrate you never authorized this. But that takes time, and Hampton isn't going to wait for expert testimony. He's going to want his money now." "What do we do?" Preston looked at Jerome's voice on the speakerphone, then back at me. "We build the case fast. File criminal charges against Boyd and Celeste for fraud, forgery, elder abuse, unlawful restraint. Get law enforcement involved before Hampton decides to collect personally. Once there's an active criminal investigation, it becomes harder for Hampton to act. Too much attention, too much risk." "How fast can you file?" I asked. "I need more evidence," Preston said. "Right now, we have Blanche's cassette tape, Dr. Kemp's confession, Jerome's camera footage, and Ivy's billing records. That's strong, but it's not overwhelming. We need the documents Blanche said are buried at the cemetery. We need to locate Blanche herself and get her testimony. And ideally, we need Boyd or Celeste to make a mistake, something that exposes the scheme so clearly that law enforcement has to act immediately." Jerome's voice came through the speaker. The Irrigation Zone 7 decoy. Blanche designed it to force Celeste's hand. If Vernon digs there and Celeste finds out, she might react in a way that reveals her involvement. That's risky, Preston said. If she suspects Vernon knows the truth, she could accelerate whatever endgame she's been planning. She's already been accelerating, I said. She brought me insurance forms on Monday. She's still trying to get me to sign things. The longer I wait, the more danger Blanche is in. Preston nodded slowly. Then we move fast, but carefully. No confrontations until we have everything documented and law enforcement ready to act. He picked up his pen again, started making a timeline on his legal pad. Jerome, can you have the complete audit finished by Friday? All force. Gamormus, the weeks. Already done, Jerome said. I'll send it to you tonight. Good. Vernon, can you get to the cemetery tomorrow and retrieve whatever Blanche buried there? Yes. Preston set his pen down carefully on the mahogany desk. His face was grave. Yes, Vernon, they didn't just steal your money, he said. They put your name on paper with people who don't call a lawyer when they aren't paid. They knock on your door. And my door was 43 miles from Burlington alone, on 50 acres of orchard, with no neighbors in sight. I left Preston's office Wednesday evening with a plan, and Thursday morning drove to the address Dr. Kemp had left in his confession, knowing that loan sharks might be watching my isolated farmhouse, but needing to find Blanche anyway. The discreet red brick building at 47 Williston Road looked exactly like what it claimed to be a respectable care facility, with manicured greenery and a modest sign reading Maple Ridge Private Care in bronze letters. Ivy's sedan sat in the parking lot across the street, positioned where she could see the entrance. My phone was in my pocket, set to vibrate. The plan was simple. I'd go in asking about elder care services for a hypothetical relative, never mentioning Blanche's name, while Ivy monitored from outside. The reception area smelled like lavender and lemon cleaner. Soft music played from hidden speakers. A woman in her mid-40s sat behind the curved desk, Ellen Morse, according to her nameplate, wearing a cardigan and a professional smile. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How can I help you?" "I'm inquiring about services for an elderly relative," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What levels of care do you provide?" "Of course." Ellen pulled out a glossy brochure. "We offer independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Is your relative local to Vermont?" "Burlington area. I'm trying to understand what options are available." She walked me through the brochure, explaining services costs, visitation policies. Everything sounded perfectly reasonable, perfectly normal. Then her desk phone buzzed an internal line, quiet enough I almost missed it. "Excuse me one moment," Ellen said, smile still in place. She stood and disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only." I waited, counted seconds. The music continued, playing something instrumental and forgettable. At 90 seconds, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out carefully. Text from Ivy. "Get out now. Blanche moved last night. No record where." Ellen returned at the 3-minute mark. Her smile was different now, still professional, but colder. The warmth had evaporated like morning fog. "I apologize, but I need to clarify something," she said, standing behind the desk instead of sitting. "Are you inquiring about a specific patient currently in our care?" "I'm just gathering information about services," I said. "I'm sorry, we cannot confirm or deny any patient information without proper authorization." The words came out rehearsed, like she'd been told exactly what to say. "If you'd like to schedule a formal consultation, we can arrange that through our intake coordinator." She'd recognized me. Someone in that back room had shown her a photo or given her a name, and now I was being professionally shut down. "Thank you for your time," I said, taking the brochure. I walked out into October sunlight that felt too bright after the dimmed reception area. Ivy was already pulling out of the parking lot, and I followed her to a gas station 2 miles away where we could talk without being observed. "They moved her," Ivy said when I got out of my truck. "I still have access to the old internal scheduling system from when I worked there. Blanche's record shows a transfer at 11 p.m. last night with no destination facility listed, just transferred per family request. They moved her. In the middle of the night, they moved my wife to a place I couldn't find, erasing her location like she'd never existed at all." "Celeste and Boyd know I'm looking," I said. "They know you went to Preston's office yesterday," Ivy confirmed. "Small-town people talk. Someone probably saw your truck and mentioned it. I drove home through midday traffic, mine working through possibilities. Blanche could be anywhere, another facility in Vermont, New Hampshire, New York. Boyd owned shell companies across state lines. Finding her without legal authority to access records would take weeks we didn't have. I pulled up to my gate at 1 o'clock and almost missed it. The camera was the size of my thumb-brown plastic, matching the weathered pine of the left gate post. Wireless with a waterproof battery housing, positioned to capture anyone entering or leaving the property. I wouldn't have noticed it, except the angle was slightly off, catching afternoon sun in a way that made the lens gleam. I parked the truck and walked back to examine it without touching. Professional installation. Recent the wood around the mounting bracket still showed fresh drill marks. I called Jerome from inside the house. "When did they install a camera to watch me?" I asked. "Probably this morning while you were at Maple Ridge," Jerome said. His voice carried the calm of someone who'd expected this. "They confirmed you're searching for Blanche. Now they want to know what you find." "This is bad." "No," Jerome said slowly. "This is good news." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Explain." "They're watching you, which means they're worried about what you might discover. But here's what you learn from 40 years of engineering. When someone thinks they're watching you, they stop watching themselves." "The decoy," I said, understanding dawning. "Exactly. Now you can control what they see. Tomorrow morning, go dig up Irrigation Zone 7. Let them watch you find the lockbox you already found Monday. Let them think that's all Blanche left for you. They'll relax, thinking they know your evidence, while you retrieve what she actually hid." At the cemetery, Jerome confirmed. "Tonight after dark, when the camera can't see you walk to the back 40, get what Blanche buried under the feng shui stone. Then tomorrow, perform for their camera." I looked out the kitchen window toward the gate where the tiny brown camera watched my driveway. Celeste and Boyd thought surveillance gave them power, but Blanche had anticipated this 3 years ago when she'd designed the trap. "They moved her to hide her," I said. "But they're watching me, which means they're still worried." "They should be," Jerome said. I stood staring at the camera on the gate post until the October sky began darkening toward evening. Tomorrow I would perform for it, dig up Irrigation Zone 7, exactly as Blanche had instructed, show them the decoy evidence and watch their reaction. But tonight, I needed to find what she'd really hidden, and it wasn't in any irrigation system. The family cemetery waited in the darkness behind the orchard, and I had a shovel in the barn. The October moon was just bright enough to see by when my shovel struck metal 40 centimeters beneath the blue moss-covered feng shui stone Blanche had tended alone for 20 years. I'd waited until 11 Thursday night to walk to the family cemetery behind the orchard, carrying the shovel and a flashlight I kept turned off. The surveillance camera at the gate couldn't see this far back, and the moon provided enough light to work by. The feng shui stone sat exactly where Blanche had placed it 15 years ago on her mother's grave. Smooth gray granite with subtle carved symbols she'd said brought peace to the dead. The soil underneath was soft, recently disturbed. She'd dug this herself, probably in the months before the fire-burying evidence where she knew I'd eventually look, but Celeste would never think to search. I was careful lifting the earth in steady scoops until the shovel blade hit something solid with a metallic ring. The tin box was the size of a shoebox, moisture-proof, with rubber gaskets secured with a small padlock. I lifted it out, brushed away the dirt, and saw the key dangling from the lock on a thin chain. Engraved on the key in tiny letters, E.C. 2019. E.C. Evelyn Catherine. Blanche's middle name's the ones she never used. The same initials on a key I'd seen on her keyring for years and never questioned. I sat on the damp grass beside my mother-in-law's grave and opened the box. Inside, wrapped in plastic, a contract from Maple Ridge Private Care with Boyd Garrett's signature as Managing Director of Green Valley Holdings, LLC. 3 months of bank statements from January through March 2021, showing transfers I'd never authorized. A document titled in Blanche's handwriting, Hayes Family Trust, Trap Clause, Original Executed Will, October 2019, and a USB drive labeled in her precise script, Video, B. Harlan, 2021 to 2022. I held the USB drive up to the moonlight. Blanche had recorded herself. From inside Maple Ridge, she'd found a way to document everything. I sat in that cemetery alone at midnight, holding evidence my wife prepared from inside a prison and understood the depth of a love that plans rescue routes in darkness. "Oh, Blanche," I whispered to the Vermont stars. "You prepared all of this alone. You left breadcrumbs in the dark, trusting I'd find them." I packed everything carefully back into the tin box, filled in the hole, replaced the feng shui stone, exactly as I'd found it. Tomorrow I'd perform the irrigation zone 7 decoy for Celeste's camera, but tonight I discovered what Blanche really wanted me to have. I walked back to the farmhouse carrying the box like it contained something sacred. Because it did. Friday morning at 10 o'clock, I arrived at Preston's office with the tin box under my arm. He was waiting with someone I didn't expect, a woman in her mid-70s with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of decades in courtrooms. "Vernon, this is Professor Vera Townsend," Preston said. "Former dean of Vermont Law School. She and Blanche went to college together 50 years ago." Professor Townsend extended her hand. 74 years old, with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent a career evaluating legal arguments and finding the flaws. "Blanche was the most meticulous woman I've known in 50 years of law," she said. "When Preston called me last night and said you'd found something she'd buried, I knew I needed to be here." I set the tin box on Preston's desk and opened it. He pulled on latex gloves before touching the document's lawyer's instinct to preserve evidence chain. Professor Townsend did the same. The secondary will was 6 pages typed and notarized with 2 witness signatures at the bottom. Professor Townsend's was one of them. "I witnessed this," she said quietly, reading through the pages. "October 7th, 2019, 9 o'clock on a Monday morning at my office. Blanche asked me, specifically said, she needed someone who understood estate law and who she could trust absolutely." Preston was reading over her shoulder. "The trap clause," he said, pointing to paragraph 4. "If Celeste Garrett or Boyd Garrett attempt to secure guardianship over Vernon Harlan, or attempt to control his assets through power of attorney, medical proxy, or any other legal mechanism," Professor Townsend read aloud, "the entirety of the 50-acre Harlan Orchard property and the associated $1.8 million trust shall immediately transfer ownership to Vermont Nature Conservancy. Celeste Garrett shall receive no inheritance, no consideration, and no claim to any Harlan family assets." The room was quiet. "She built a bomb into the inheritance," Preston said finally. "The moment Celeste tried to take control, she'd lose everything. She executed this will at 9 a.m. on a Monday in October 2019. Professor Townsend said, looking at me over her reading glasses. Her mind was sharper than most 40-year-olds I've witnessed for. She knew exactly what she was doing. Preston had moved on to the USB drive, plugging it into his laptop. The video file loaded, and suddenly Blanche filled the screen. She sat in a simple room, Maple Ridge based on the facility furniture visible in the background. Her silver hair was neat, her expression calm, and her eyes were absolutely clear. She looked directly at the camera and spoke in the voice I'd heard on the cassette tape, the voice of the law professor who'd taught for 25 years. If you've never watched video of someone you love speaking from captivity with absolute clarity, you can't know how it splits hope and heartbreak into the same breath. The video ran 47 minutes. Blanche narrated chronologically, noticing Celeste photographing financial documents in 2018, asking Jerome to install cameras in August 2020. The warehouse fire she didn't cause being drugged and removed to Maple Ridge. The falsified diagnosis Dr. Kemp was blackmailed into signing Boyd's shell companies, the systematic theft of assets. She spoke like she was giving testimony, precise and detailed, occasionally referring to documents she held just off camera, completely lucid, completely competent. The video was dated March 2022, 6 months ago. "This destroys any claim that she has Alzheimer's," Preston said quietly. Professor Townsend was still holding the will, looking at the date. October 2019. "She knew in 2019, she said, meeting my eyes. Whatever Celeste was planning, Blanche saw it coming a full year before the fire. Your wife wasn't just brilliant, Vernon. She was frightened. And I still didn't know where Blanche was being held right now. I left Preston's office Friday afternoon with more questions than answers. Blanche had known danger was coming in 2019, but I still didn't know where she was being held now. The phone buzzed at 9:17 that night while I was reading her secondary will for the 3rd time, trying to understand how my wife had seen this coming 3 years ago. Unknown Vermont number. I almost didn't answer. The text message was short. "Mr. Harlan, Blanche is being well cared for in a safe place. We strongly encourage you not to disrupt her treatment. It will not benefit her health." I read it twice, then screenshotted immediately and forwarded it to Preston and Jerome. My hands were steady. The message was a threat dressed up as concern, and threats meant they were worried. Preston called back within 4 minutes. "Vernon, this is threatening communication. he said without preamble. 18 U.S.C. Section 875, federal statute. And more importantly, it's an admission. They just admitted in writing that they're holding Blanche somewhere. Can you trace the number? Already sent it to a contact who can. But that's secondary. What matters is they threatened you in a traceable format. It will not benefit her health, is an implicit threat of harm if you continue investigating. I'm forwarding this to the FBI tonight. Jerome called 10 minutes later with his forensic accountant's precision. They're panicked, he said simply. Panic makes people stupid. This text proves they know you're building a case. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the message on my phone screen until the backlight dimmed. They'd just threatened my wife's health in writing signed with their silence. Criminals always believe they're too smart to leave evidence. Engineers know better. I didn't sleep well that night. Monday morning at 10:30, the mail carrier delivered an official Addison County court envelope at the orchard gate. I signed for it, standing in October sunlight that felt too bright. The surveillance camera I'd discovered last week, watching from its pine post perch. Inside, petition for guardianship and mental competency evaluation, filed by Celeste Garrett, October 10th, 2022. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time, each word landing like a physical blow. The petition claimed I'd missed doctor appointments 3 times in the past 6 months, that I'd made paranoid allegations against my devoted daughter, that I'd been observed digging up the apple orchard for no apparent reason, showing signs of confusion and possible dementia, that my behavior had deteriorated significantly since my wife's placement in specialized care 3 years ago. Attached clinical notes from Dr. Simone Blackwell, a Burlington psychiatrist Celeste had introduced me to 6 months after Dr. Kemp's death. 48 years old professional credentials that looked impressive, notes documenting 2 sessions I barely remembered agreeing to. According to Dr. Blackwell's assessment, I appeared disoriented during our meetings, made statements that lacked logical coherence, and displayed paranoid ideation regarding family members. She recommended comprehensive neurological evaluation and consideration of supervised living arrangements for my safety. The hearing was scheduled for December 5th, 2022, 8 weeks from today. I walked back to the house and called Preston. They filed the petition, I said. Preston's voice was calm, unsurprised. Read it to me. I went through it line by line, the missed appointments, the paranoid allegations, the digging in the orchard, Dr. Blackwell's notes. Dr. Simone Blackwell, Preston said. I'll run a background check. How many sessions did you actually have with her? 2 maybe. Celeste brought her around in May, said it would be good to talk to someone after losing Dr. Kemp. I went twice to be polite. And you never signed release forms for her to share those notes with Celeste? No. That's an ethics violation. But more importantly, Vernon, do you understand what's happening? How does a daughter look at the path she used to imprison her mother and think, yes, this will work on my father too? She's doing to me what she did to Blanche, I said. Preston was quiet for a moment. Yes. The threatening text Friday night didn't stop you, so Celeste is escalating. Petition for guardianship psychiatric evaluation, showing confusion and paranoia, a December hearing date. It's the exact playbook she used 3 years ago. What do? We use it, Preston said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. She just handed us proof of pattern. She's not adapting her tactics, she's repeating them. That makes her predictable. I'm filing an expedited review motion today under Vermont statute, arguing this petition is part of a systematic elder abuse scheme. We'll request the court review Blanche's case simultaneously with yours, show the identical methodology. Can we do that? We can try, and we have 8 weeks to build overwhelming evidence. Jerome's forensic audit, Ivy's billing records, Blanche's video testimony, Dr. Kemp's confession, the threatening text. Now this petition showing she's using the same tactics twice. We're going to walk into that December 5th hearing with a case so strong the judge can't ignore it. I stood at the orchard gate, holding the petition, watching October leaves drift across gravel. The surveillance camera stared down from the pine post like a mechanical eye. They're using the path that locked up Blanche to lock me up, I said into the phone. Preston was silent for a beat, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something that sounded like satisfaction. Yes, he said, and we're going to use that exact same path to bring you both out. I looked at the petition in my hand. December 5th. 8 weeks. 8 weeks to build a case that would save 2 lives instead of 1. 8 weeks to prove that my daughter had imprisoned her mother and was now trying to do the same to me. 8 weeks to find Blanche and bring her home before Celeste succeeded in erasing us both. The surveillance camera watched me walk back to the farmhouse. Tomorrow I'd perform for it, dig up irrigation zone 7, let them think I was finding the decoy evidence Blanche had planted. But tonight I had work to do. Preston needed documentation of every interaction with Dr. Blackwell. Jerome needed access to financial records showing the pattern of theft. And somewhere out there, Blanche was waiting for me to finish what she'd started 3 years ago when she buried evidence under a feng shui stone and trusted I'd eventually find it. 8 weeks. It would have to be enough. The surveillance camera on the gatepost had been watching for 7 days. When I finally gave it the performance, Blanche's letter had choreographed 3 years in advance. Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, I carried a shovel and water bucket across the orchard to Zone 7's northeast corner, where the irrigation valve sat under a cluster of aging Macintosh trees. The October air was cold enough to see my breath. I moved deliberately, knowing the camera angle could capture this section of the property if I positioned myself right. The irrigation valve was exactly where it had been for 20 years, buried under 18 inches of soil and tree roots. I started digging, working slowly, like a 72-year-old man who'd spent the night worrying about a competency hearing 8 weeks away. 20 minutes in, my shovel hit plastic. The box was small, weatherproof, secured with a simple latch. I opened it, carefully tilted it so the camera might catch the motion. Empty. Blanche had buried nothing here except the promise that someone would dig, and someone would watch, and someone would react. The decoy was perfect because it looked exactly like evidence while containing none. I sat back on my heels, studying the empty box like it disappointed me, then carefully reburied it and walked back toward the farmhouse. Celeste's BMW came screeching up the gravel drive 37 minutes later. I was washing the shovel at the outdoor spigot when she stepped out holding a manila court envelope with the kind of triumphant smile that played at the corners of her mouth like she'd won something. "Morning, Dad," she called, walking toward me in designer boots that had no business on a farm. "What are you looking for out here so early? Digging alone this early isn't good for your back." "Just checking the irrigation system," I said, keeping my voice mild. "Zone 7's been running slow." "In October?" Her smile didn't waver. "The irrigation's been shut off for 3 weeks. "The preventive maintenance," I said. "Winter prep." She looked past me toward the northeast corner, calculating. The surveillance camera had done its job. She'd watched me dig something up, watched me study it, watched me bury it again. Now she was here to find out what I'd found and what I knew. "I brought some paperwork," she said, holding up the envelope. "Since the court is reviewing your competency petition, I thought it might help to have temporary power of attorney in place, just to manage things while everything gets sorted out. Save you the worry." She pulled out the document, offered me a pen that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. "If you've ever had to perform normalcy while your daughter stands 3 feet away, holding documents designed to imprison you, you understand how thin the membrane between civilization and survival becomes. Let me read it carefully, first, sweetheart." I said, taking the papers, but not the pen. Preston always tells me to read everything before signing. Her eyes hardened for a fraction of a second, the same micro-expression I'd seen when I'd deflected signing insurance forms 3 weeks ago. Then the smile returned, warm and concerned. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. I just want to help." She stayed another 20 minutes, asking about my health, about whether I'd been eating properly, about the court petition, and did I understand what it meant. Every question designed to sound like concern, while actually assessing whether I was onto her. I played confused but cooperative. Mentioned that I couldn't quite remember why I'd been digging in Zone 7, that maybe she was right about my memory. Watched her relax incrementally, convinced the act was working. When her BMW disappeared down the driveway, I walked inside and called Preston. "She took the bait," I said, 37 minutes after I dug up the decoy. "Good. That confirms she's watching the camera feed actively. Now she thinks that's all you found." The next morning, Thursday at 11, I sat in Preston's office reviewing Jerome's completed forensic audit when my phone rang, Ivy's name on the screen. "I found Blanche," she said without preamble. "Maple Ridge Private Care, 23, Ethan Allen Highway, Colchester. Different facility, same name. It's also linked to Boyd's shell company called Maple Care Partners Incorporated." I gripped the phone tighter. "You're sure?" My contact in the nursing network confirmed it. Blanche is there under supervised care, listed as high-risk wandering patient with advanced dementia. Preston had gone very still, watching my face. "There's something else," Ivy said, her voice dropping. "Her sedation was increased 2 weeks ago, right when you started asking questions at the first Maple Ridge. They're keeping her more heavily medicated now. They'd drugged my wife more heavily because I dared to look for her. Every step I took toward Blanche, they pushed her further into chemical fog." Preston took the phone from my hand, switched it to speaker. "Ivy, this is Preston Wolfe. What's her current medication protocol?" "Lorazepam 2 milligrams 3 times daily, up from 0.5 milligrams twice daily," Ivy said. "That's a significant increase. At that dosage, she'd be heavily sedated most of the day." Preston was already standing, pulling a legal reference book from his shelf. "This is immediate risk of harm, under Vermont Statute 14 VSA, Section 3069, subsection B. Inappropriate medication for control purposes rather than medical necessity." He picked up his office phone, dialed a number from memory. "Agent Fox, Preston Wolfe. I need to discuss an intervention warrant for an elder exploitation case. Agent Adrienne Fox, 45 years old, specialized in elder financial exploitation cases for the FBI's Vermont Division. Preston had been coordinating with her since the threatening text message Friday night, building the federal case parallel to our state competency defense." I listened to Preston explain the situation, Blanche's location, the increased sedation, the timing correlation with my investigation, the pattern of systematic abuse. His voice was steady, professional, laying out facts that felt like they were happening to someone else's family. When he hung up, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She's opening an official investigation," he said. "But Vernon, you need to understand the FBI doesn't move fast. They need overwhelming evidence before they act. We're talking weeks, maybe longer." "Blanche doesn't have weeks," I said. "Not at that sedation level." "I know." I looked out Preston's office window at Lake Champlain, cold and still in late October light. Blanche was in Colchester, only 45 minutes away, close enough I could drive there right now. But I sat motionless, because Blanche's letter had been clear: "Don't let Celeste know. Not yet." The next move belonged to someone I had never expected to lose. 6 calls to Jerome's phone went unanswered before I understood that my oldest friend had vanished, and with him the only copies of the evidence that could save Blanche. Friday morning at 7 o'clock, I dialed Jerome's number to confirm our afternoon meeting. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I tried again at 7:15, 7:30, 8. By 9 o'clock, I was in my truck driving to his house. The driveway was empty, no lights in the windows. I knocked anyway, waited, knocked again. Nothing. Jerome's neighbor, an older woman I'd seen at the grocery store, was checking her mailbox. "Excuse me," I called. "Have you seen Jerome?" "Oh, he left last night," she said. "Around 9 o'clock. Had a suitcase with him. Didn't say where he was going." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. A suitcase? Big one, the kind you take for a long trip. I called Preston from Jerome's driveway. "Vernon, slow down," Preston said after I'd explained. "Let me check something." I heard him moving through his office, the click of a safe opening. A long silence. "The original audit files are gone from my safe," Preston said, finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Jerome had the combination. He took them." "Why would he?" "I don't know, but without those originals, we only have copies. In court, copies can be challenged as fabricated. The originals were our proof of authenticity." I sat in my truck outside Jerome's empty house while October wind rattled dry leaves across his lawn. My oldest friend for 15 years. The man who'd stayed up all night analyzing financial records to help me. The man who'd kept Blanche's security footage safe for 3 years. Gone. My phone buzzed. Text message from Celeste. "Dad, I heard your friend is in some trouble. Do you need me to help? I'm always here for you." Celeste's text appeared on my screen like poison dressed as kindness. "I'm always here for you." The phrasing was too familiar, too smooth, too practiced. She knew. Somehow she knew Jerome had disappeared, knew it would hurt me, knew I'd be vulnerable. The text arrived within hours of Jerome leaving, which meant either she'd been watching him too, or worse, she'd gotten to him somehow. 7 weeks remained until the December 5th hearing. No Jerome, no original files, just copies that a good lawyer could argue were fabricated. I drove home and spent the day calling every number I had for Jerome, his cell, his office line from when he'd worked as a forensic accountant. An old friend of his I'd met at a chess tournament years ago. Nobody had heard from him. Nobody knew where he'd gone. By 11 that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. A single yellow lamp cast long shadows across the oak surface. The power of attorney form Celeste had left during the orchard incident lay before me next to the fountain pen Blanche had given me for my last birthday, my 72nd 2 weeks before she disappeared. No Jerome, no original files. 7 weeks to a hearing I couldn't win without evidence. Blanche sedated daily 45 minutes away, unreachable. Before I tell you about the night I nearly gave up, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think I should have signed that paper, or B, if I should keep fighting. Add one short reason why. Please note, some details here are adapted for emotional impact, but the choice I faced was real. I picked up the pen, Blanche's pen, the one she'd wrapped in blue paper with a card that said, "For signing all the important things." She'd meant contracts for apple sales paperwork for the orchard, maybe a new will when we got old enough to need one. Not this, never this. The power of attorney form had blank spaces where my signature would go. Celeste's lawyer had highlighted them in yellow. Sign here, initial here, date here. 3 simple acts that would give my daughter temporary control of my finances while the competency hearing proceeded. Temporary. That's what the form said. But I'd seen what temporary meant when it was applied to Blanche 3 years ago. I held the pen over the signature line. My hand was steady 72 years of muscle memory from signing checks and contracts and Christmas cards. The pen felt light, just a fountain pen, just ink and metal and memories. If you've ever held a pen over the document that will end your fight, you know how heavy an empty pen becomes. I looked up at the kitchen wall. The wedding photo from 1975 hung where it always had Blanche in her white gown, with long black hair smiling straight at the camera, like she was looking at me across 47 years. She'd fought alone for 3 years in a room without windows. 3 years of pretending to be confused while her mind stayed sharp. 3 years of planning and waiting and trusting that eventually I'd find the evidence she'd buried. I'd been fighting for 3 weeks. Maybe this is too much, I said aloud to the empty kitchen. Maybe I should just sign it and trust her. The wedding photo didn't answer. Blanche's smile stayed the same, frozen in 1975, when we'd thought we had forever. Blanche fought alone for 3 years in a room without windows. I said to the photograph to myself to the silence. I put the pen down, folded the power of attorney form in half, then quarters, then eighths. Put it in the kitchen drawer where I kept takeout menus and twist ties and other things I might need someday, but probably wouldn't. No, I said to the empty room, not tonight. I turned off the yellow lamps and went upstairs in darkness. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not sleeping, thinking about Jerome and where he might have gone and why. Thinking about Blanche sedated in Colchester. Thinking about 7 weeks and overwhelming evidence and federal investigations that moved too slowly. But I didn't think about signing that form. Not anymore. I went to sleep in the dark farmhouse not knowing where Jerome had gone or why. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I didn't have the right to give up after 3 weeks. Monday morning would bring an answer I never expected. The elevator doors opened at 9 Monday morning, and Jerome Dalton stepped out carrying the same suitcase I'd feared meant betrayal, but the look on my old friend's face said something entirely different. I'd arrived at Preston's office at 8:30, exhausted from a sleepless weekend spent wondering where Jerome had gone and why. Now he walked toward us through the reception area, like he'd simply been on vacation, setting the suitcase down beside Preston's desk, with the careful deliberation of someone who'd just completed a dangerous task. I went to see Rufus Hampton this weekend, Jerome said without preamble. Brought him the complete evidence of Boyd's debt and the forged mortgage papers with your signature, Vernon. I stared at him. Rufus Hampton. The loan shark who ran a pawn shop as a front for lending money to desperate people at rates that would make legitimate banks blanch. The man who thought I'd guaranteed Boyd's debt because my forged signature appeared on collateral documents. You went alone? Preston asked, his voice carefully controlled. I gave him a choice. Jerome continued sitting down, like we were discussing chess strategy instead of a meeting with a dangerous criminal. Cooperate with federal prosecution or face investigation for loan sharking, accepting illegal collateral, and operating an unlicensed lending business. All federal crimes. Multiple jurisdictions. Preston leaned forward. What did he say? He chose self-preservation. Rufus will withdraw his capital demand from Boyd immediately and testify in court about the forged collateral papers. He's already spoken with his own attorney about an immunity deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Jerome opened the suitcase and pulled out the original audit files, the ones I'd thought were lost forever. He placed them carefully on Preston's desk. "I needed to keep them somewhere safer than your office safe," he said. "The FBI has its own vault now. Agent Fox accepted them Friday night as evidence in the federal investigation. These are certified copies for our use." I sat back in my chair, feeling something like relief flood through me for the first time in 3 days. Preston looked at Jerome across the desk and asked the question I couldn't. "Do you know who Rufus Hampton is?" Jerome nodded. "I know. That's why I went alone without telling anyone. If it went wrong, I didn't want Vernon or you implicated. But I've been doing forensic accounting for 40 years. I know how to present evidence to a man who understands numbers. Rufus saw the math, cooperate, and walk away clean, or fight and face federal prison. He made the rational choice." "You could have been hurt," I said. "So could you every day you're on that orchard with Celeste watching through her surveillance camera," Jerome said. "We're all taking risks now, Vernon. I just took mine where I thought it would do the most good." Tuesday afternoon, Jerome arrived at Preston's office with deeper findings from his audit. We gathered around Preston's laptop, while Jerome pulled up spreadsheets that tracked money through 3 shell companies: Green Valley Holdings, LLC, Maple Care Partners, Inc., and Vermont Senior Services, LLC. I traced the final destination. Jerome said, clicking through screens, "All roads lead to Zurich." The screen showed a Credit Suisse account statement. The balance read $890,000. The account holder's name appeared at the top in clean Swiss banking font, Celeste Marie Garrett. $890,000, Jerome said quietly. "Credit Suisse Zurich, Celeste's name only." I leaned closer to the screen. "Where's Boyd's name?" "That's the point," Preston said, scrolling through the document. "Boyd's name is nowhere on this account. She planned to cut him out completely." Jerome pulled up another document. The account opening paperwork dated March 2021, 2 years into the scheme. Celeste had signed as sole account holder, no joint ownership, no authorized users, no beneficiaries except herself. This is an FBAR violation," Preston said. 31 U.S.C. Section 5316. U.S. citizens must report foreign financial accounts over $10,000. This is 89 times that threshold, and she never reported it. She was going to divorce him. I said, understanding dawning. "Take the money and leave." "Probably," Jerome agreed. Boyd took all the risk forging documents, dealing with Rufus Hampton running the facilities managing the guardianships. And Celeste structured the theft so she'd walk away with everything, while Boyd faced the criminal liability. Celeste hadn't just betrayed her parents. She'd betrayed her husband, her children's father, the man who'd helped her imprison my wife. She had no allies, only victims she ranked by usefulness. Preston was already drafting notes. "The FBI will want this immediately. Foreign account unreported connected to the elder exploitation scheme. This elevates the case to international financial crimes." "There's more," Jerome said. "The account shows regular deposits starting January 2021, always under $10,000 per transaction, to avoid triggering automatic reporting. Classic structuring behavior. That's a separate federal crime." I looked at the numbers on Preston's laptop screen, $890,000, sitting in Zurich under Celeste's name. A loan money stolen from my accounts and Blanche's trust, and probably other victims we hadn't identified yet. "She was going to leave him with nothing," I said quietly. Preston nodded, still typing notes. "Boyd committed the crimes. Boyd forged the signatures. Boyd dealt with dangerous people like Rufus Hampton. And when it all collapsed, Celeste would be in Switzerland with the money, while Boyd faced federal prosecution in Vermont. That's the perfect exit strategy," Jerome said. "Except we found it." Preston saved his notes and looked up at both of us. "There are secrets people keep to protect themselves," he said. "And there are secrets that only need the right light to explode." He picked up his phone. "I'm calling Agent Fox. She needs to see this today." That light was about to shine from a federal office in Burlington. And when it did, Celeste's carefully constructed plan would detonate like the bomb Blanche had built into her secondary will 3 years ago. The trap clause that said, if Celeste tried to take control, she'd lose everything. Now, we had proof she'd already taken everything, and the law was finally catching up. Jerome packed up his laptop. "The December 5th hearing is still 7 weeks away," he said. But with Rufus Hampton testifying, the Swiss account exposed, and the FBI opening a formal investigation, we're not just defending against a competency petition anymore. No, Preston agreed. We're prosecuting a conspiracy. I sat in Preston's office watching him dial Agent Fox's number, watching Jerome organize evidence with the precision of 40 years in forensic accounting, and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 weeks, the certainty that we were going to win. Not just survive, win. My hands didn't shake as I walked into the Vermont FBI field office conference room Wednesday morning, but my wedding ring felt heavier than it had in 43 years. Agent Adrienne Fox sat across the table with 2 file boxes and an expression that told me she'd already made a decision, I just didn't know which one yet. Preston sat beside me, his briefcase open with copies of everything we'd submitted, Jerome's forensic audit, the Zurich account statement's medical records, showing the contradiction between Dr. Kemp's confession and the diagnosis used for Blanche's guardianship, documentation of the restraints, and monitoring wire transfer records tracking money through shell companies. Mr. Harlan. Agent Fox said, her voice professional, but not unkind. I've reviewed the evidence package your attorney submitted. I want to be clear about what we're looking at here. She pulled documents from the first file box, laying them out in sequence. Probable elder exploitation under 18 U.S.C. Section 1347. Unlawful restraint under Vermont Statute 13 VS-A, Section 2407. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. And a potential FBAR violation. Failure to file FinCEN Form 114 for foreign financial accounts over $10,000. She tapped the Zurich account statement showing Celeste's name and the balance that had grown to $890,000. This is a federal case, Fox said. No question. The financial crimes cross state lines, involve foreign accounts, and show pattern and sophistication. I'm opening an official investigation as of this morning. Relief flooded through me. The FBI believed me. They saw what Celeste had done. Then Fox slid a photograph across the table. We've had surveillance on some of the facilities in Boyd Garrett's network, she said. This was taken October 12th at a Burlington Starbucks. The photo showed Celeste sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. She was smiling, leaning forward, clearly engaged in conversation. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. October 12th, 2022. October 12th. The same day she'd texted me, saying she was too exhausted to visit, that work had been overwhelming, and she needed to rest. Who is he? I asked. We're still identifying, Fox said. But the point is, your daughter's public narrative doesn't match her actual activities. That matters. She pulled the photo back and looked at me directly. Here's the limitation, she said. Federal testimony requires witness competency. Vermont Probate Court has a hearing scheduled for December 5th to review the guardianship petition your daughter filed against you. Until that judge rules that you're legally competent, I can't use your testimony in federal court. Preston leaned forward. Agent Fox, with respect, FBI authority supersedes state guardianship law. My client is clearly competent. I agree, Fox interrupted. But incompetent witness testimony is inadmissible. If I build a federal case on Mr. Harlan's testimony now, and the Vermont court rules him incompetent in December, defense counsel will get everything thrown out on appeal. I won't risk that. The paradox hit me like cold water. The FBI believed I was capable enough to be a victim and a witness. Vermont law said I was incapable of testifying unless a judge reversed the guardianship. I had to prove I was competent to testify about being wrongly declared incompetent. What can you do? I asked. Fox's expression softened slightly. I can investigate. I can interview witnesses, subpoena financial records, coordinate with state prosecutors. And I can offer strategic support if you win competency restoration on December 5th. My forensic lab will authenticate any evidence you want to present, including audio recordings. She looked at Preston. I understand you have a cassette tape. If Mr. Harlan wins his hearing, bring it to me. We'll run full forensic authentication under federal chain of custody. Magnetic signature analysis tape, age verification, recorder, fingerprinting, spectral certification. Impossible to fake with 1970s technology. Thursday afternoon, Ivy arrived at my farmhouse kitchen, where Blanche had hidden her cassette recorder in the weeks before Finn Sawyer delivered it to me. Preston joined us via speakerphone, and we designed what he called the authentication trap. We leak a fake digital audio file. Preston explained, his voice crackling slightly through the speaker. Let Celeste's legal team claim it's AI-generated, fabricated, manipulated. Then we produce the FBI-authenticated magnetic tape with unbroken chain of custody. How do we leak it? I asked. Dr. Harlow, Ivy said immediately. The psychiatrist Celeste hired to evaluate you for the competency hearing. You have an assessment scheduled October 28th. Mention the recording casually. Say you found an old tape, you're not sure what's on it. Harlow reports everything to Celeste. It was elegant, simple, used Celeste's own surveillance against her. Ivy stood to leave, then paused at the kitchen drawer where I kept dish towels and spare batteries. She opened it, reached toward the back, and pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded and tucked behind the towels. What's this? She asked. I took it from her hands. The paper was lined notebook stock, dated in the upper right corner. September 8th, 2022. One day before, Celeste had filed the guardianship petition. The title was written in Celeste's distinctive handwriting, small, precise, the kind of script you develop from years of signing real estate contracts. VH Assets. Below the title, a list. Every account I owned, every investment, every property deed. Dollar amounts, account numbers, institution names. And at the bottom, in the same careful handwriting, Credit Suisse Zurich, $890,000. My daughter had inventoried everything I owned one day before she filed papers to take control of it all. She planned this, I said quietly. Every step. This wasn't reactive. This was calculated. Ivy took the paper back, studying it with the analytical eye of someone who'd seen too many similar documents in her work. She left it here, Ivy said. In a kitchen drawer you use daily. Not locked away, not hidden. Just folded and tucked behind the dish towels. Careless, Preston said through the speakerphone. Maybe, Ivy replied. Or maybe part of her wanted you to find it. I stared at the list, my daughter's handwriting, cataloging the theft of my life's work, the systematic erasure she'd been planning since before she filed the first legal paper. She must have pulled it out during Monday's visit to confirm a number, then tucked it away without thinking, the carelessness of someone who never imagined her father would look in a kitchen drawer. Ivy placed the handwritten list back in the drawer exactly where Celeste had left it, visible to anyone who looked. 46 days until the hearing, she said. She gave you the tools for your own rescue, Vernon. The question is whether she knew she was doing it. I looked at my daughter's cursive loops, spelling out the dollar amounts she'd hidden from me, the accounts she'd drained, the future she'd stolen. Or whether, I said quietly, part of her wanted me to find them all along. The first snow of the season dusted Middlebury at 28 degrees, the morning I walked into the 1827 granite courthouse to prove I wasn't insane. 46 days had passed since finding Celeste's handwritten asset list in my kitchen drawer. 46 days of preparation, evidence gathering, and the slow, methodical building of a case that would either restore my legal competency or confirm my daughter's claim that I was too confused to manage my own life. I parked 3 blocks from the courthouse, hands steady on the steering wheel. Preston met me at the entrance, his briefcase heavy with documentation. Ready? He asked. I nodded. What else could I say? The courtroom smelled like old wood and furniture polish. Judge Helene Prescott, in her 16th year on the Vermont probate bench, was known for methodical evidence review and an absolute intolerance for procedural games. She looked up as we entered, her reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Celeste sat at the defense table with her attorney Harrison Webb. He was Dartmouth-educated, an elder law specialist who'd built his reputation defending contested guardianships. 52 years old, silver hair, expensive suit. Boyd sat beside Celeste, his face carefully neutral. Ivy had taken a seat in the back gallery. All rise, the bailiff called. Judge Prescott entered, took her seat, and looked at both counsel tables. This is a competency restoration hearing for Vernon Harlan, she said. Mr. Webb, you're representing the petitioner, Celeste Garrett. Mr. Wolfe represents the respondent. Opening statements. Harrison Webb stood buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Your Honor, this case is about a father's tragic decline and a daughter's desperate attempt to protect him. Webb began, his voice carrying practiced sympathy. Mr. Harlan's delusions of captivity are textbook paranoid ideation in early-stage dementia. He's misinterpreted his late wife's protective care as imprisonment turned normal financial management into conspiracy, and become convinced that his own daughter, who has cared for him devotedly for 3 years, is somehow his enemy. He gestured toward me. Dr. Simone Blackwell's evaluation notes document Mr. Harlan's confusion, his paranoid allegations, his inability to distinguish reality from delusion. My client seeks only to ensure her father's safety and proper care. Webb sat down. Judge Prescott looked at Preston. Mr. Wolfe. Preston stood, and his voice was nothing like Webb's smooth sympathy. Your Honor, opposing counsel mistakes a husband's survival instinct for confusion. Vernon Harlan didn't escape care. He escaped unlawful restraint. And the evidence will show that his daughter orchestrated a systematic scheme of financial theft, falsified medical diagnoses, and criminal conspiracy spanning 3 years. He pulled out the first document. I'll present security camera footage showing Mrs. Garrett conducting unauthorized surveillance of Mr. Harlan's home, a suicide confession from the physician she blackmailed into providing false diagnoses, and forensic accounting documenting $890,000 hidden in foreign accounts Mrs. Garrett never disclosed to this court. I'll hear the evidence, Judge Prescott said. Mr. Wolfe, you may proceed. Preston set up the laptop and projector. The first video loaded grainy black and white footage from the camera Jerome had installed in my study in August 2020. The timestamp read April 18, 2021, 11:47 p.m. Celeste entered my study using a key I'd never given her. She went straight to the filing cabinet, opened the top drawer, and began photographing bank statements with her phone. Video 1, Preston said. April 18, 2021. Mrs. Garrett accessing Mr. Harlan's financial records without permission or disclosure. He played the second video. July 2, 2021, 1:23 a.m. Celeste at the filing cabinet again this time, copying documents with a portable scanner. Video 2, July 2nd. Note the timestamp after midnight when Mr. Harlan was asleep. Video 3. Video 4 froze on Celeste's face 2 inches from my Fidelity statement phone. Camera raised the timestamp, reading 2:17 a.m., May 3rd, 2022. Her expression was focused, methodical, not the face of a concerned daughter, the face of someone cataloging assets. Video 5, 6, 7, each one showing the same pattern, each timestamp correlating to dates when money had moved through shell companies toward the Zurich account. Video 6, Preston said. July 2nd, 2022. Mrs. Garrett photographing the Zurich account routing number. Harrison Webb stood. Your Honor, a wife accessing household financial records isn't surveillance. It's marriage. Mrs. Garrett isn't Mr. Harlan's wife, Preston said. She's his daughter. And if this was innocent household management, why did Mrs. Garrett never disclose these financial activities to this court when she filed for guardianship? Webb sat down. The courtroom had gone very quiet. Preston closed the laptop and pulled out a different file. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit B, a letter from Dr. Hugo Kemp, Mr. Harlan's family physician for 25 years, written November 11th, 2021, one day before Dr. Kemp died of an apparent heart attack. Preston began reading. I falsified Vernon Harlan's competency assessment under coercion. Celeste Garrett possessed evidence of my DEA violations, prescription and fraud from 2015 and threatened exposure unless I supported her guardianship petition with fabricated cognitive decline documentation. I couldn't live with what I'd done. This confession is my final act of honesty. Harrison Webb was on his feet. Your Honor, this is inadmissible hearsay from a deceased witness who can't be cross-examined. It qualifies as a dying declaration under Rule 804, subsection B, Part 2, Judge Prescott said calmly. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Wolfe. Preston read the rest of the letter, the details of how Celeste had found Dr. Kemp's mistake, how she'd used it to force him to sign papers, declaring me incompetent, how the guilt had eaten at him until he couldn't function. I watched my daughter's hands grip the defense table edge until her knuckles whitened, and for the first time in 71 days since I'd escaped that locked farmhouse, I felt something close to pity. She'd built this scheme so carefully, planned it for years, and now it was collapsing in a Vermont courthouse while the first snow of winter fell outside. Harrison Webb stood his voice tight. Your Honor, given the scope of evidence presented, defense requests a recess to consult with our client. Celeste's face had gone chalk white. Boyd's hand was on her shoulder, the only thing keeping her upright. From the gallery, Ivy caught my eye and gave one small nod. Harris and Webb returned from recess with the posture of a man who'd found an exit route, and the audio forensics expert he'd hired in 90 minutes proved why. "Your Honor, defense calls Dr. Kevin Shore," Webb announced. A man in his early 40s walked to the witness stand, trim build, wire-rimmed glasses, the deliberate movements of someone accustomed to testifying. Dr. Kevin Shore, Stanford-trained audio forensics specialist, who'd built his reputation detecting digital manipulation for federal prosecutors and Fortune 500 litigation teams. Webb had clearly spent the recess burning through Celeste's retainer. "Dr. Shore, you've reviewed the audio file Mr. Wolf submitted as evidence," Webb asked. "I have." "What did you find?" Shore pulled out a laptop, connected it to the courtroom monitor. A waveform visualization appeared, peaks and valleys of sound rendered in blue and green. The spectral analysis shows clear AI synthesis markers at 4.2 kilohertz and 8.7 kilohertz. Shore said, highlighting two sections. "These frequency anomalies are consistent with neural network voice generation. The file also contains digital compression artifacts incompatible with analog recording. My conclusion is unambiguous. This audio was digitally generated, not recorded from a human source." The courtroom went silent. I felt Preston tense beside me. Webb turned to Judge Prescott. "Your Honor, opposing counsel has presented fabricated evidence to this court. I move to dismiss this entire proceeding for prosecutorial misconduct." Celeste's color was returning. Boyd's hand found her shoulder again. Across the gallery, Ivy's face had gone tight with concern. Judge Prescott looked at Preston. "Mr. Wolf, do you have a response to Dr. Shore's findings?" Preston stood, and I caught something in his expression. Not panic, but the careful calm of someone playing a longer game. "Your Honor, Dr. Shore's analysis is entirely correct," Preston said. "The digital file is fake. I never claimed otherwise." Webb's confidence flickered. "Your Honor, the digital file Dr. Shore analyzed was a decoy," Preston continued, "leaked deliberately to identify parties monitoring Mr. Harlan's case through illegal surveillance. The actual evidence is this." He gestured to the bailiff, who wheeled forward a cart bearing a sealed evidence box with FBI custody tags. "Defense calls FBI Special Agent Adrienne Fox." Agent Fox entered the same federal investigator who'd taken my statement in October. She took the stand, was sworn in, and Preston opened the evidence box with gloved hands. Inside sat two Sony cassette recorders, each in a separate clear evidence sleeve. "Agent Fox, please describe this evidence." "Two items," Fox said. "First, Sony TCM 200DV cassette recorder tape labeled for Vernon, October 2022. This is the tape Mr. Harlan received at the Harvest Fair. FBI Forensic Audio Lab confirmed magnetic signature consistent with recording date of October 2022. Voice match 99.7% matched to Blanche Harlan." Content: Mrs. Harlan's first-hand account of her captivity, the staged warehouse fire, the falsified diagnosis, and the shell companies used to transfer assets. "Second item," Preston asked. "A second TDK cassette recovered from Mrs. Harlan's personal effects at the Colchester facility during the intervention on December 4th. This tape was recorded September 14th, 2022, by Mrs. Harlan using the same Sony recorder she had hidden in her nightstand. It captures a conversation between Mrs. Harlan and the defendant Celeste Garrett. Same authentication protocol, magnetic signature conclusive. The recording is genuine." Preston loaded the second tape. Blanche Harlan's voice, recorded in a locked room 45 minutes from my farmhouse while I'd been grieving her, spoke the words that would end her daughter's freedom. "The Zurich account has 890,000 now," Blanche's voice said, crackling with the analog warmth no digital file could replicate. "When Vernon's declared incompetent, I transfer the rest. He'll die thinking he lost everything. Celeste gets her inheritance early, we're set for life, and he'll be too confused to fight back." Celeste's returned color drained completely. The tape continued 12 minutes of Blanche drawing Celeste out, asking careful questions, letting her daughter confess to asset transfers, Dr. Kemp's blackmail, the guardianship timeline. Every detail Preston had alleged confirmed in Celeste's own voice, while she believed my wife was too far gone to remember. When it ended, Judge Prescott's expression had turned to stone. "Mr. Shore, does your analysis of AI synthesis apply to analog magnetic tape?" she asked. Shore looked uncomfortable. No, Your Honor. Pre-digital magnetic recording technology operates on entirely different principles. If the FBI authentication is valid, this recording predates modern synthesis capability. Webb sat down heavily. Celeste stared at the cassette recorder like it was a weapon pointed at her heart. Judge Prescott called lunch recess. We reconvened at 1:30. Mr. Wolf, your next witness, Judge Prescott asked. Prosecution calls Rufus Hampton. The man who entered was 62, weathered face, expensive suit that didn't quite hide the muscle underneath. Rufus Hampton, Burlington-based loan enforcement specialist who'd spent 30 years financing debts the banks wouldn't touch at 22% interest. Mr. Hampton, do you know Boyd Garrett? I do. Mr. Garrett owed me $340,000 plus accumulated interest for gambling debts incurred between 2019 and 2021. How was this debt secured? Mrs. Garrett Celeste Garrett brought me forged mortgage papers in July 2022. Vernon Harlan's signature property deed to his Middlebury residence as collateral insurance. She said if Mr. Garrett defaulted, I could file claim against the property. Did you verify the signature? Mrs. Garrett provided what appeared to be notarized documents. I accepted them as valid collateral. Preston pulled out photocopies, handed them to Hampton. Are these the documents? Yes. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit F mortgage forgery using Mr. Harlan's property as unauthorized collateral for debts he never incurred. Boyd Garrett rose so fast, his chair tipped backward, crashing against the courtroom floor with a sound like a gunshot. I didn't forge anything, Boyd shouted, his voice breaking. Celeste did it all: the documents, the account transfers, the blackmail. She forged Vernon's signature, she threatened divorce. If I didn't cooperate, she planned everything. Mr. Garrett, Harrison Webb started. I want separate counsel, Your Honor. Boyd's face had gone red, hands shaking. I'm not going down for her crimes. I want immunity. I want protection. I want out. Judge Prescott's gavel came down hard. Order, Mr. Garrett. Given the apparent conflict between you and your wife, I'm granting your request for separate representation. Bailiff arrange separate counsel chambers. Two bailiffs moved toward Boyd, who stood trembling, staring at Celeste with something between rage and terror. Harrison Webb gathered his files in silence, the carefully constructed defense collapsing around a marriage that had just detonated in open court. I watched my daughter sit motionless alone now as her husband was escorted out. Boyd's hand, the one that had rested on her shoulder 90 minutes ago, was now pointed at her throat. Judge Prescott adjourned until 3 o'clock. The afternoon session would determine what remained of Celeste's defense and whether anything could be salvaged from the wreckage Boyd had left behind. The courtroom doors opened at 3 o'clock afternoon, light flooding the gallery, and Blanche Harlan walked in, unaided. No wheelchair, no walker, no nurse supporting her elbow. My wife entered the Addison County Courthouse in a navy wool coat, silver hair, neat, 71 years old, and moving with the steady gait of someone who'd been practicing this moment for months. Celeste's face went the color of old snow. Agent Fox held the door. Ivy followed behind her, expression carefully neutral. Blanche crossed the courtroom 20 feet that seemed to take an hour and placed her hand over mine where it rested on the counsel table. I'm here, she said. Her voice was clear, strong, unchanged from the thousands of mornings we'd shared coffee before all this started. I knew you would find me. I couldn't speak. 71 days since I'd climbed out that farmhouse window. 71 days believing my wife was either dead or too damaged to remember me, and here she stood, with her hand warm against mine. Judge Prescott leaned forward. Mrs. Harlan, are you prepared to testify under oath regarding the events described in this petition? I am, Your Honor. Blanche looked at Celeste for the first time. Our daughter sat frozen, Harrison Webb's hand on her arm, the only thing keeping her upright. I've been preparing for 3 years. Preston stood. Your Honor, prosecution calls Blanche Harlan. Blanche took the witness stand, was sworn in, and settled into the chair with the composure of someone who'd rehearsed this testimony 1,000 times. Mrs. Harlan, when did you first become aware of your daughter's activities? Preston asked. Spring 2018. I noticed Celeste photographing our bank statements during a Sunday dinner visit. She said she was helping organize our records for tax season, but Vernon and I had already filed. That's when I asked Jerome Dalton to install security cameras Vernon didn't know about. The courtroom had gone completely silent. The cameras were hidden. In the bedroom, the study, the kitchen. I wanted documentation of what Celeste was doing when she thought we weren't watching. What did the cameras show? 14 months of unauthorized access, photographing account statements, copying investment records, researching guardianship law on our home computer. By October 2019, I updated our will to include specific fraud protection clauses. Preston pulled out a document. Is this the will you drafted? Blanche reviewed it. Yes, it explicitly revokes inheritance rights for any heir who attempts guardianship through fraudulent means. I had it notarized October the 17th, 2019. What happened next? The warehouse fire was November 2019. I didn't cause it, that was genuine accident, but it gave Celeste an opening. Starting September that year, I began experiencing confusion, memory lapses, coordination problems. My neurologist found benzodiazepines in my system. Someone was drugging me. Celeste's hands gripped the table edge, knuckles white. How did you respond? Blanche's expression didn't change. I pretended the cognitive damage was permanent. It gave me 3 years to document everything, while Celeste believed I was too impaired to be a threat. 3 years of feigned weakness. 3 years of watching Celeste believe the drugs had erased the mother who'd raised her 3 years. Blanche spent building an escape route, one careful signal at a time. You maintained this deception for 3 years, Preston asked. With help from Finn Sawyer, a nurse at the Rutland facility where I was placed after the guardianship went through. Finn developed a signal system, eye blinks, finger movements, so I could communicate without Celeste knowing. We documented every visit, every conversation, every time Celeste discussed the Zurich accounts, thinking I couldn't understand. The cassette recording Vernon found, can you explain how that was created? Mpuis destanan asis in Lambopo, September 14th, 2022. 1 year after the guardianship began. Celeste visited my room, believing I was too far gone to remember conversations. I had the Sony recorder hidden in my nightstand, the same one from our farmhouse. I asked her to tell me what was happening. To Vernon said I wanted to understand, even if I couldn't remember later. She told me everything. The pieces were assembling into a picture I'd never imagined. My wife, drugged and locked away, had spent 3 years playing a role so perfectly that our daughter had confessed to conspiracy while standing 5 feet from her. Why didn't you contact Vernon directly? Celeste monitored all communication from the facility. Any direct contact would have exposed my capacity and destroyed the evidence I was gathering. I needed her to believe I was no threat until the documentation was complete. Preston nodded. Your Honor, prosecution rests. Judge Prescott looked at Harrison Webb. Cross-examination scheme. De musikboer, de wijkstas. Webb stood, but his heart wasn't in it. No questions, Your Honor. The courtroom shifted. Preston pulled out a final folder. Your Honor, before we adjourn, I'd like to submit Exhibit 47C, Credit Suisse Zurich account statements covering March 2021 through November 2022. He handed copies to the judge, to Webb, to Boyd's new attorney. I watched Boyd's face as he read the first page, watched understanding break across his features like dawn over frozen ground. Sole account holder, Celeste Marie Garrett, Preston read. No secondary authorization, no joint ownership. Mr. Garrett's name appears nowhere in the account structure, despite his criminal exposure to the mortgage forgery, the loan enforcement violations, and the unlawful restraint charges. Boyd turned slowly to Celeste. His new attorney, a public defender named Marcus Hayes, assigned during the 2-hour recess, leaned close and whispered something. Boyd's hand fell to the table like dead weight. Your Honor, Hayes said, standing. My client wishes to make a statement. Mr. Garrett was unaware his name was excluded from the foreign accounts. He believed he and Mrs. Garrett were equal partners in what he now understands was her sole conspiracy. Mr. Garrett offers full cooperation with federal authorities in exchange for consideration of his lesser role. Celeste didn't look at Boyd, didn't look at anyone. She sat staring at the Zurich account statements that proved she'd planned to take everything and leave him holding criminal liability for crimes that would earn him federal prison time. Judge Prescott made notes for several minutes. When she looked up, her expression carried the weight of 30 years on the bench. This court will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow for final ruling on competency restoration and referral to federal prosecution. Both defendants will remain in custody overnight, given flight risk concerns. Bailiff, please coordinate with the U.S. Marshal's office. The gavel came down. Bailiffs escorted Boyd and Celeste through separate exits as Judge Prescott left the bench. Under the counsel table, where no one else could see my 73-year-old hand, found Blanche's and her fingers, steady, capable, undamaged, closed around mine. We'd spent 71 days apart. Tomorrow would determine if we'd spend the rest of our lives free. They stood as Judge Helene Prescott entered the courtroom at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, 6 inches of new snow visible through courthouse windows, and I realized I'd stopped breathing. Blanche's hand found mine. We'd spent the night in separate hotel rooms, Preston's caution about appearance of impropriety, but now we stood together while our daughter sat 15 feet away in Orange County Jail coveralls. Judge Prescott settled into her chair, opened a leather folder, and looked at the assembled courtroom. This court has reviewed all evidence testimony and exhibits submitted over the course of this competency restoration hearing, she began. The findings are comprehensive and unambiguous. She looked directly at me. This court finds that the guardianship petition filed September 23, 2022 was procured through systematic fraud, coercion, and criminal conspiracy. All powers of attorney executed under duress are void, ab initio, void from the beginning. My chest loosened. Blanche's grip tightened. Mr. Vernon Harlan's legal competency is fully restored, effective immediately. Mrs. Blanche Harlan is declared fully competent with all prior diagnoses of cognitive impairment dismissed as fabricated evidence. Judge Prescott opened another folder. This court is directing the clerk to forward complete case records to the United States Attorney for the District of Vermont, the FBI, and Vermont State Police for immediate criminal investigation. Charges under consideration include elder exploitation, unlawful restraint, wire fraud, conspiracy, and aggravated identity theft. She looked toward the back of the courtroom. Federal arrest warrants for Celeste Marie Garrett and Boyd Thomas Garrett are executed immediately. Bailiffs take them into custody. 2 federal marshals move forward. Celeste didn't resist as they placed handcuffs on her wrists. The fight had drained out of her somewhere between the Zurich account revelation and her husband's betrayal. Boyd, seated at a separate table with Marcus Hayes, looked smaller than he had 2 days ago. The marshals led them toward the side exit. Celeste turned once briefly and our eyes met. I saw my daughter, 51 years old, gray threading through dark hair, brown eyes inherited from my mother, and felt something I couldn't quite name. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the memory of who she'd been before. Then she was gone. Judge Prescott's gavel came down. This matter is concluded. Blanche turned to me, tears on her face for the first time in 3 years. We were 73 and 71 years old, legally competent and free. Preston shook our hands. Congratulations. Full account access restored by end of week. FBI will handle Swiss asset recovery 3 to 6 months. And Celeste, I asked, if federal prosecution moves fast on elder fraud, she'll likely take a plea. The next 3 weeks unfolded in phone calls, legal documents, and slow unwinding of the machinery that had controlled our lives. Several weeks later, Preston called with the plea agreement. Celeste took a deal, 4 counts wire fraud, conspiracy, elder exploitation, identity theft, 18 years federal prison. She'll be 73 when she's eligible for release. My age now, December 22nd. Agent Fox met us at a Burlington coffee shop. We found 8 other victims in similar schemes across Vermont facilities, she said, all released to family or appointed independent guardians. Dr. Blackwell's license suspended pending investigation. 2 facility administrators under indictment. 8 people freed because Blanche had spent 3 years gathering evidence. December 28th, Preston called again. Boyd's cooperation deal came through. 5 years probation, full restitution. He gave up everyone. Rufus Hampton got 7 years. For loan enforcement violations, the notary who forged your signature faces state charges, 3 other enablers cooperating. 18 years, 5 years, probation. 8 victims freed, 7 years for Hampton, $340,000 in restitution. 73 days from escape to verdict. The arithmetic of justice rarely balances perfectly, but sometimes it comes close. Blanche and I spent Christmas at the farmhouse, the first holiday in 3 years, where we controlled our own time. Ivy visited on the 26th, brought homemade cookies, helped Blanche sort through FBI return documents. We didn't talk about the case. We talked about Ivy's advocacy practice expansion plans, about Blanche's spring gardening, about ordinary things that felt extraordinary. December the 31st arrived cold and clear. 7:30, Evening Blanche reading in the living room. I was considering whether to stay awake until midnight when Preston called. Vernon Boyd's cooperation turned up something else. He said, without preamble. Ruth Hallett, Ivy Lancaster's mother, died at the same Rutland facility in 2019. Ruled accidental fall case closed, but Boyd's phone records show 6 calls to facility staff in the 72 hours before her death. The kitchen went quiet. Ivy never mentioned, no, she kept it separate, professional boundaries. Preston's voice carried something between admiration and sadness. But I don't think her help was ever just professional. I think she's been looking for answers about her mother since the day that case was closed. I thought about every time Ivy had reviewed evidence with that particular intensity, that careful distance masking something deeper, and understood she'd been searching for her own mother in every document. State police are reopening Ruth Hallett's case, Preston continued. If Boyd was involved, if there's any connection to the facility's guardianship schemes, Ivy deserves to know. I thought you should tell her. I stood in the farmhouse kitchen after Preston hung up, snow falling outside, the same windows where Blanche had recorded her confession 14 weeks ago. Ivy Lancaster had helped save my life, and my wife's freedom had fought with dedication beyond professional advocacy, and I'd never known she was searching for answers about her own mother's death. Tomorrow was New Year's Day. Tomorrow I would call Ivy and tell her what Boyd's cooperation had revealed, and watch her decide whether the reopened investigation brought closure or simply reopened her deepest wound. Outside, fireworks started early somewhere across the valley. Blanche came to stand beside me, her reflection ghosting beside mine in the dark window. What did Preston want? She asked. I told her about Ruth Hallett, about Ivy's mother, about the case reopening. Blanche was quiet for a long moment. Then, call her tonight. Don't make her wait until tomorrow, wondering why you're reaching out on New Year's Day. Give her tonight to process before the official notification comes. She was right. She was always right about these things. I found Ivy's number and dialed before I could reconsider. The call to Ivy would come later, on New Year's Eve. But 2 weeks before that, Judge Helene Prescott looked at me across the bench Monday morning and asked the question I'd been preparing to answer for 6 days. Mr. Harlan, do you want your property back? Blanche sat beside me at the plaintiff's table. Preston had his briefcase open, the property restoration documents ready for my signature. The 50-acre orchard, the farmhouse we'd refinanced in 2019, the investment account Celeste had tried to drain all of it, could be mine again, with one word. No, Your Honor. Preston didn't look surprised. We'd discussed this for 3 days. The orchard and the assets Celeste tried to steal will fund the Vermont Elder Protection Network, I said. Blanche and I will steward the land, but we won't own it. The nonprofit charter was filed this morning. Judge Prescott leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same careful attention she'd given the evidence at trial. Mr. Harlan, I've presided over 16 years of property disputes in this courthouse. This is the first time I've watched someone refuse what legally belongs to them. It belongs to the people who will need protection next, Blanche said quietly. We built that orchard together. Now it can build something bigger. Preston stood. The deed was filed at 8 o'clock this morning, Your Honor. The nonprofit charter names Vernon and Blanche Harlan as lifetime volunteer stewards with zero ownership interest. The endowment, approximately $1.8 million after asset recovery, will fund elder advocacy, legal representation, and facility oversight across Vermont. Judge Prescott made notes for several minutes. When she looked up, something in her expression had softened. The court acknowledges transfer of property to Vermont Elder Protection Network, a registered 501c3 nonprofit. Mr. and Mrs. Harlan retain stewardship rights with no financial interest. This is perhaps the most appropriate resolution I've witnessed. Her gavel came down. Proceedings concluded. We walked out into December, cold the courthouse steps slick with morning ice. Blanche took my arm, not because she needed support, but because she wanted to. The difference mattered. Your daughter tried to steal everything you built, Preston said as we reached his car, and you gave it away anyway. Not away, I said. Forward. 4 days later, Friday afternoon, Blanche and I met Ivy at the same Virgin Cafe where I'd first sat down 79 days ago, and said I thought my wife and daughter were trying to erase me. The cafe looked exactly the same worn wooden tables, same smell of coffee and cinnamon, same afternoon light slanting through windows overlooking the falls. But everything else had changed. Blanche saw Ivy first and crossed the cafe in 4 strides, pulling her into an embrace before either of them spoke. I watched Ivy's careful professional composure crack, watched her arms come up around my wife, watched 2 women who'd both survived what should have broken them hold each other in a coffee shop while other patrons pretended not to notice. "Vernon told me about your mother," Blanche said when they finally separated. "About Ruth. I'm so sorry you carried that alone while helping us." We sat at the same corner table where Ivy had first agreed to take my case. She looked thinner than she had in October, shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. "The FBI found phone records," Ivy said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Boyd called the facility 6 times in the 72 hours before my mother's fall. He altered activity logs, suppressed witness statements from 2 nurses who reported concerns. The state police have enough for criminally negligent homicide charges." Blanche reached across the table and took Ivy's hand. "Your mother won't have died in vain," Blanche said, "and neither will the 8 others Agent Fox found. Ruth would be proud of what you did, Ivy, proud of who you are." Ivy nodded, not trusting herself to speak. We talked for 2 hours, about the nonprofit, about the testimony Ivy would give at Boyd's homicide, hearing about the facility reforms Vermont was implementing because of what had been exposed. We didn't talk about Celeste. That wound was too fresh, too complicated. We talked instead about what came next, about building something that would outlast the damage. When we left, the December sun was already setting, the winter sky turning that particular shade of blue that only comes in the shortest days of the year. Ivy hugged us both in the parking lot. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me, for seeing what I couldn't say." "And thank you for finding us," I said, "for finding all of us." Blanche and I drove south on Route 7 toward the farmhouse. The radio played something classical and quiet. Outside, the Vermont landscape rolled past in shades of white and gray and deepening blue. 10 minutes into the drive, I glanced over and realized Blanche had fallen asleep. Not the drugged unconsciousness of the years under Celeste's control, not the restless nightmare-broken sleep of the first week after the verdict. This was natural sleep, the kind that comes when your body finally believes it's safe to let go. Her breathing settled into the rhythm I'd memorized over 43 years of marriage, the rhythm I'd thought I'd lost forever in September. Her hands lay relaxed in her lap, no tension in her shoulders, her face peaceful in the dashboard light. 3 years she'd slept under surveillance, under sedation, under threat. 3 years of maintaining the fiction of incapacity of recording evidence while pretending to be too damaged to remember of planning our escape while Celeste believed she was winning. Now she slept because she was tired, because she was safe, because she was free. I drove carefully through the Vermont winter twilight, keeping the car steady so nothing would wake her. Recovery wasn't linear. Preston had warned me about that. There would be hard days ahead, moments when the trauma resurfaced, times when we'd both struggle with what we'd survived. But this sleep, this trust, this peace was real. The orchard we'd built together would protect people we'd never meet. Celeste would spend the next 18 years in federal prison. Ivy Lancaster would testify about her mother's death at Boyd's homicide hearing, and maybe finally Ruth Hallett would get justice. Justice wasn't always proportional to pain. I'd learned that the hard way, but sometimes rarely it came close enough. I turned into our driveway as the last light faded from the sky. Blanche stirred slightly but didn't wake. "We made it," I whispered. "We both made it." Her hand moved in sleep fingers curling slightly, and she smiled without opening her eyes. That peaceful sleep came a week after Blanche first stepped back into our home. 3 days after the verdict, the FBI released her to my custody, and she stood at the threshold of her own kitchen, touching the doorframe like she was checking if it was real. "It's real," I said quietly. She stepped inside. Her hand found the oak table and traced a long scratch near the edge. "This scratch," she said. "From when we moved the canning equipment in '94, I thought I'd forgotten." "You didn't forget anything." She moved through the kitchen touching things. The wedding photo on the wall, the ceramic jar that held wooden spoons, the window over the sink that looked toward the orchard. "Show me the trees," she said. We walked through December snow to the oldest apple tree planted in 1987 when the orchard was just beginning. Its branches were bare dark against the white sky. "I watered it every season," I told her, "even when I thought you'd never see it again." Blanche touched the bark. "Finn told me. Every week she'd say, 'Your husband kept the farm. I knew you were waiting.'" She turned to me, snow catching in her silver hair. "That's how I survived 3 years, Vernon. Finn Sawyer brought me updates about this place every single week. What you planted when you harvested, how the snow looked. She had been Blanche's only thread back to the world outside those walls. I hadn't known. 3 years of careful weekly reports from a nurse I'd never met, keeping my wife tethered to home while she pretended to be too damaged to remember. That evening, Blanche walked to the family cemetery alone. When she came back, her hands were muddy. "The feng shui stone was wrong," she said. "I fixed it. Mother would have hated the placement." She washed her hands at the sink, and I understood. Reclaiming the kitchen, the orchard, the cemetery, reclaiming every physical space meant reclaiming the identity Celeste had tried to steal. 4 months and 16 days separated December's snow from April's blossoms, separated courthouse verdict from orchard celebration, separated the end of imprisonment from the beginning of protection. April 22nd, 2023 arrived warm and clear, the apple trees white with blossoms. The Vermont Elder Protection Network officially launched that afternoon with a gathering under the oldest tree. 8 freed patients attended with their families. Ivy Lancaster coordinated operations from a renovated barn office. Jerome Dalton managed the network's financial audits. Preston Wolfe served on the advisory board. Professor Vera Townsend, a Vermont Law School specialist in guardianship abuse cases, provided pro bono legal counsel and had already filed protective petitions for 3 new clients. Agent Fox signed the FBI partnership agreement. "The 8 victims freed from Vermont facilities are proof this model works," Fox said. "We're replicating it in 3 other states next year." Blanche stood to speak, and the assembled crowd, maybe 60 people scattered among the blooming trees, went quiet. "This network exists so no one else has to sit in locked rooms counting days while their lives are stolen," she said. "Vernon and I built this place over 43 years. Now it protects others. That's the only inheritance worth leaving." Afterward, she found Finn Sawyer, a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and steady hands, standing near the refreshment table. "You told me about the farm every week," Blanche said, taking Finn's hands. "About Vernon watering the trees, about the snow, about the harvest. You kept me connected when they wanted me erased. Thank you." Finn's eyes filled. "You were the bravest patient I ever had. 3 years you played that role perfectly, and you never broke." "I broke plenty," Blanche said, "but you put me back together every week with news about home." I watched them embrace 2 women who'd maintained a lifeline through 3 years of manufactured helplessness and deliberate survival. That evening after the guests left, Blanche and I sat in the porch chairs, with teacups surrounded by white blossoms and the smell of warming earth. The first fireflies blinked in the Vermont twilight. "I thought once," Blanche said, "and I know this is terrible, but I thought at least in that room, no one could make me attend another law school faculty budget meeting." I laughed. Actually laughed, the sound coming from somewhere deep that had been locked tight for 3 years, 1 month, and 21 days. "Blanche, I'm serious," she said, but she was smiling. 3 hours of tenured professors arguing about copy paper allocations versus captivity in a locked room. It was close. 3 years since I heard you make a joke like that," I said when I could speak again. "I thought they'd taken your humor forever." They tried, but spite is surprisingly durable. The fireflies blinked the same pattern they had blinked 43 springs before when I first brought Blanche to this porch, and would blink 43 springs after indifferent to human imprisonment or human freedom. I reached for her hand. "Love can't be imprisoned," I said, watching the lights pulse in the gathering dark. "Not really, no matter the locks or the distance or the time." Blanche's fingers closed around mine. "We proved that," she said. 74 days apart, and we still found our way back. Down the hill, volunteers prepared tomorrow's spring harvest fair, the same fair where I'd sold apples every year since 1980, the same fair Celeste had attended as a child, before choosing theft over inheritance, the same fair that would continue long after both of us were gone. The orchard would continue, the network would grow, and Blanche Harlan would sleep peacefully in her own bed, tonight beside the man who'd watered her favorite tree for 3 years, believing she might never see it again. We sat on the porch as darkness settled, fireflies blinking among the white blossoms, 2 people who'd survived what should have destroyed them, and chosen to build protection instead of seeking revenge. Love it turned out really couldn't be imprisoned, not by locks, not by distance, not by time, not by the daughter who'd tried to erase us both. Below, the fair preparations continued. Tomorrow the orchard would fill with families and laughter and the sale of apples from trees we no longer owned, but would tend until we couldn't. That seemed right. That seemed like enough. Blanche leaned her head against my shoulder, and the fireflies kept blinking, and the spring fair would begin at dawn. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I trusted too easily. I signed papers without reading them carefully. I saw my wife's confusion and accepted the first explanation. Don't make my mistake when something feels wrong with family, especially around legal documents or money trusts that feeling. Ask questions. Get a second opinion. The people who truly love you won't rush you or make you feel guilty for being careful. What I learned is that real dad family revenge isn't about destruction. It's about protection. When my daughter betrayed me, I could have sought to hurt her back. Instead, Blanche and I chose to build something that would protect others. That's the kind of family revenge that matters, turning your pain into someone else's safety. I believe God allowed me to go through those 71 days so 8 other families wouldn't suffer the same way. Sometimes the hardest battles a dad faces with family teach us the lessons we're meant to pass forward. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about how I handled things, or share your own experience with family trust. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. And if you want more stories about a dad's calm revenge against the people who underestimate us, subscribe to Dad's Calm Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One last reminder. Some details in this story have been fictionalized to protect privacy and strengthen the message, but the core lesson about family trust and turning pain into protection, that's as real as it gets.